Okay, we're live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council for January 2021. We've got a full slate of council members tonight, and we will have a number of different people presenting to council tonight. And I understand that we have a number of people who are watching us on YouTube. So welcome to you as well. And as always, at the end of the session, if there are questions that are presented by the folks that are watching through YouTube, council will address them at that time. You have an agenda that was emailed to you. Rather lengthy document this time. But entertain a motion to amend and approve the agenda. Councillor Carver.
Yes, I would like to shorten the agenda by asking to remove item number 7.3, which is not time sensitive and could be moved to a future agenda.
Okay, thank you.
And a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Okay, Councillor Burdick.
I just wanted to note that the date on the agenda that's been provided says December 8th, 2020. So that should just be updated to reflect the today. Thanks.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
I was wondering whether council will be favorable to moving an agenda item from where it is right now to moving it up a little bit. And in particular, I'm thinking about the what probably has a lot of draw is the Planning Advisory Committee draft minutes. If we can bring it closer to the top, I think some of the community members will appreciate that.
Okay. Anyone have any objection to moving the report from the PAC up the agenda? Hearing none, I think we would, I noticed we've got a presentation from the public on the same topic. Perhaps we can move it up to 3.3 and address it then, if that's okay. Okay. We have a seconder for the motion, please. Councillor now seconds it. Councillor Carver has moved the motion with the adjustments. We've eliminated item 7.3, actually postponed it to a later meeting, and we've moved the PAC report to the 3.3 position on the agenda. That's the agenda. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Mayor, I'd move that the minutes of the regular meeting of January 12th, 2021 be approved as submitted.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick. On the question. Councillor Carver?
Yes, I noticed in reading those minutes, the special meeting, that when the agenda was approved, there was a request to add an item, notice of motion to the agenda, yet the minutes did not reflect anything about a notice of motion. So I wondered if something had been lost there.
An error in the minutes, so I can fix that.
Also, isn't that on the next one?
Yeah, that's the next agenda. That's the next meeting.
I have
Yes.
another correction to the next one too when we get there.
What do you mean the next one?
Pardon me, Mayor, the motion just pertains to the meeting of January 12th.
Yes, it does.
Sorry.
Just applies to the regular meeting on January the 12th.
Yes.
The special meeting on the 18th will be a separate motion. Okay? So the mover for the motion was Councillor Feeney. The seconder was Councillor Burdick. You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to the special meeting on the 18th.
Councilor Carver, do you want to do the
Yeah,
honor?
yes, do you want me to say again what I've noticed in those minutes? In the minutes, it refers to the agenda having been amended to include a notice of motion. And yet in those same minutes, there was no reference to a notice of motion being made. So I wondered if something had been lost there.
That was an error, entirely my error. We can, if council's prepared to, and I believe Dylan said he had noticed another error. So if I can just make a note of these, and council, if they're willing, could put forward a motion to approve the minutes as amended, and I'll make those amendments that are noted.
Yeah, since we
Mr.
haven't put it
Hyde.
on the floor yet, I might as well mention the other one. So in the TBR motion, Joe, you probably noticed this anyway, the number and the wording are inconsistent. So it spells out 2.7 and then it actually is the number 1.7. So that's just an obvious
didn't-
correction.
I didn't see
but
that. But
I hadn't noticed it till I was looking at where
what's
Penny
$1 million
called attention.
between friends?
Yeah,
Ah,
so if we could get somebody to do both of those ones as corrected, that would be.
okay. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes with the amendments as noted to follow. Moved by Councillor Feeney, seconded by Councillor Carver. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to our presentations section. And first, Mr. Little, Greg Little, wants to speak to the glamping proposal at 994 Main Street. Mr. Little, if you please.
Very good. Good evening, Honorable Mayor Davini and councilors. Want to thank you for allowing me to speak in opposition to the campground proposal known as glamping for the property at 994 Main Street. And that's the that adjoins my property at 984 Main Street. So am I coming in loud and clear?
Excellent.
Okay, very good. Okay, besides myself, many concerns have been expressed by the adjacent residents in letters to council, such things as water supply, wildfire, surface runoff, traffic, trespass, sewage and garbage, access road, peace and quiet enjoyment, property values, etc. I don't plan on going over these points again, as these issues have been submitted in detail to letters to council. Instead, my concern for extending and broadening the scope of the commercial activities as requested in the glamping proposal through the changing the wording in the land use bylaws seems conceptually at odds with the purpose of the residential unserviced or RU zoning. My understanding of this zoning is to reserve a percentage of the town's land base for future residential expansion. Presently, the land use bylaw allows very limited commercial activity in the residential unserviced zone, both in the number of units and in the area to be occupied. This restriction in number of commercial units and their area of activity keeps a check on the potential of increasing intensive commercial, institutional, and industrial land development. The spirit of this low intensity commercial activity for the residential unserviced is demonstrated in the bylaw 4.5.16C. And for example, permits the use of offices, craft workshops, personal service shops, studios, daycare, pet grooming, etc., just to name a few. Proposal for the 20-site campground pushes the envelope of the commercial impact and activity to what might call new level of intensity in this zoning. This is substantially larger than the small in-home business operation intended under the two types of residential zoning, the residential and residential unserviced. The campground proposal clearly seems to fall outside the concept or the intent of the town's land use bylaw for these two zones. This requested amendment or expansion of the permitted use language is not presumably site specific, but for all residential and service zoning. And that's not an insignificant area of the town. These residential and service zones effectively encircle the town from the eastern boundary in the area of the proposed campground and right around to the Mushamusha River on our north side. Further to the 20 campsites proposed is additional structures for ancillary activities, including washrooms, showers, kitchen, and a common area for retreats. On top of all this development, a retail store to service the clientele is also proposed. And finally, all this commercial operation is accessed by road over land zoned for and occupied by residential homes. The question would be, does this commercial access road effectively include residentially zoned properties in the proposed commercial activity, and therefore act contrary to the intent set out in section 5.2.1a, subsections 1, 2, and 3 of the town's bylaws? And that section is the single and 2-unit dwellings, parks and playgrounds, and open spaces permitted. With the changes to the land use bylaw language, can then any commercial operation conceivably demand equal footing for development in the residential and service zones throughout the town? This creeping expansion of permitted commercial activities could very well mark a downward trajectory. Shoehorning a campground operation into the outskirts of the town, just because it might work there, could set an undesirable precedence for the remaining of the residential unserviced zones. And so that's basically the presentation. I might, if you allow me, I'll have an anecdotal tale of cautionary tale, if you will, that involved the town. I doubt anybody here might be around when it happened, possibly except for our honorable mayor. And that was to do with the Irving gas station. When the town went to odds with it over the setting up of that brilliant monolithic canopy that graces the front of the Irving station, which is hardly in keeping with our town's architecture. So I don't know if anybody else was aware of the particular event. I see a few are nodding. My understanding was that with the onset of winter, Irving came to the town hall with lawyers in tow, requesting, I guess it would be called like a temporary variance on the development permit. And they asked to put in the underground fuel storage tanks and other necessary work, I think was the phrase. And then as soon as that was okayed, the canopy went up virtually overnight. So fiddling with the town bylaw wording can have unintended consequences, the bylaw land use wording. So it's kind of a cautionary tale with our experience with Irving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Anyone have any questions for the citizen on the issue as he discussed it? Okay, thank you. We've got a second presentation at 3.2, and then we'll discuss the PAC report. Chris Hyde,
Thank you, Your
please.
Worship. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, councillors, for having me here tonight. I've got to say, I've had a little trouble not raising my hand whenever you've called for a vote, Your Worship, because it's just sort of impulsive after 8 years on town council. Yes. Anyway, I'm here tonight actually to represent the South Shore chapter of the Council of Canadians. Can you all hear me all right? Good.
Yep.
What we do, we wish to convene a public session on inequality sometime this winter. And what we're requesting is that the session be co-presented with the town of Mahone Bay, along with the South Shore Council of Canadians. We haven't really done all the thinking around this session yet, but what we're calling it is inequality and a just recovery. And as we move towards a COVID-free world, we hope, can municipalities better respond to issues such as homelessness, climate change, and discrimination? And I can certainly give you a few other issues as well: housing, long-term care, healthcare generally, but from a municipal focus. So how can municipalities plan for a just recovery so that we don't go back to the old normal? We go back to a new and invigorated normal that is more equal for all of our citizens. I'm the one who has agreed to put together the panel to speak on these various issues. I'd like to get a panel that's got a diversity of perspectives. The Council of Canadians doesn't have a political affiliation, so the panelists would be selected on the basis of their expertise. We have a very substantial mailing list at the council, and as some of you will know, when we've done events in the past, which of course were often live events, we've generally had a very strong session. The last session that I chaired in public at the Mahone Bay Centre had over 300 people attempting to get in the room. So we have a lot of people out there who follow the Council of Canadians and are interested in what we're trying to do. But this time we really want to ensure a municipal lens. We want to say the same question should be asked to the province. How can they do a more just recovery? And it should be asked to the federal government. But for this session, we're looking at a municipal focus. So if we can co-present for the town of Mahone Bay and have the mayor or deputy mayor or a councillor as one of the panelists, and with the town embracing the partnership, we feel that this will generate a lot of interest from the other municipal units in the area as well, having that kind of leadership. So we think we'll have people watching from Lunenburg and municipality and Bridgewater. That'll be a real plus in terms of moving some of these items forward. I've been really impressed with what the town has done with its technology, what we're doing tonight, for instance, the combination of Zoom and YouTube. We don't have those capabilities within our South Shore chapter of Council of Canadians. So that's a big plus for us as well, is being able to partner with you. That would probably be the only cost involved, because if we were to use your platforms, then I would be very much hoping that Kelly Redden, who's done a great job of putting things together for you guys, could also manage the technology. And that might mean that she has to put in a few hours. I wouldn't think very many. And we could either cover her wage, or if we're partnering, we could split her wage, or I'm sure that's not going to be a substantial cost. So that's why I'm here, basically, as I say, to request that the session on inequality and a just recovery be co-presented by the town of Mahone Bay and the South Shore Council of Canadians. If publicity for the event, I think the town would want to vet all of that publicity. You might also want to vet who the panelists would be, and that's fine too. In fact, I would really appreciate suggestions from any council member as to who good panelists would be. But co-presenting is what we're hoping for. We don't have a date yet. We're really looking to this first step, seeing whether the council from the town of Mahone Bay would be willing to support the concept.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Hyde? That Mr. Hyde. Alice? Councillor Burdick, sorry.
I guess the first question is because there was a direct address in the letter to whether or not you, Mayor, or you, Deputy Mayor, would be interested in being on there. I don't know if if this is the time to answer those questions, but that's one of my questions, is if either of you would be interested. And the other part is, you mentioned sometime in the winter. Is this something, Chris, that you anticipate being able to get together fairly quickly?
Do we put the mayor and the deputy mayor on the spot first?
So on that note, I just wanted to reference that while council can declare that they would have an interest, no decisions can be made in respect of a delegation request until our next meeting. So,
For sure.
Mr. Mayor, you're free to say if you'd like to do it, but I just wanted to point out that the decision will have to wait till the next meeting.
I certainly would like to do it, but I think the information that we need from the organization is some indication of what the issues are going to be, because it's not my personal opinion, and I should think not the deputy mayor's personal opinion. It's what council has decided is the perspective that we would want to project in this panel discussion. And that would take a bit of preparation once we are aware of what the issues are going to be for the Council of Canadians. So I would defer, other than to say I'm interested, I would defer until we have an opportunity to determine what council's position would be on the issues.
Did the deputy mayor want to comment also?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things you touch on are pretty close to my heart. Just recovery, equity, and I guess I don't even want to use the word normal, because I don't think we had a very normal world in the past. We had a very abnormal world. We just got used to it, and so I think there's a lot that we can talk about from that perspective. And similar to the mayor, I think there's a bit more detail that I would need to sort of say, yes, for sure, I'd want to be on a panel. The question I have for you is, why Mahone Bay? Why the town of Mahone Bay? Are you related to Mr. Hyde in any way? Just out of curiosity. But I think why the town of Mahone Bay will help me sort of see where this, I guess, potentially could be headed. And I see lots of potential in many of the things in there that could be of interest to me as an individual. So it'd be good to just get a bit more detail as to.
All right, well, quickly I've just noted 3 different things to respond to. In terms of the issues, I think, Mr. Mayor, that I was kind of looking to spokesperson for the town of Mahone Bay, perhaps to concentrate on environmental issues. I think our town has a very strong reputation in that area. And that's an area where some municipalities may feel that they actually can't do much, whereas I think our municipality has shown that we can do a great deal. So that's specifically what I was thinking of. But I also wouldn't restrict what else we might be interested in having spokesperson from the town of Mahone Bay on. That was my initial thought. As far as why Mahone Bay, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, I've lived here since 1983, and Dylan is my son, and so I have obviously an allegiance. I feel more comfortable, being in partnership with the town of Mahone Bay than I would any other municipality. But at the same time, I also think that Mahone Bay is, in my opinion, the most progressive and forward-thinking of the municipalities in the county of Lunenburg, and I think it sets a good example. So that's another reason why I was thinking of Mahone Bay. And to Councillor Burdick, my thought was late February, early March. So we certainly have some time, not a huge amount of time. And the only reason I'm thinking that way, I guess, is because I feel like, with any luck, by April, we'll be starting to think of getting outside more and in our gardens, that kind of thing. So that's why I was thinking of sort of very, very early spring.
Councillor Wilson had his hand up, and then we're going to go to Councillor Carver.
Just quickly, I'm a little confused about protocol here. The CAO just said that we can't decide anything about this initiative until the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, the council policy prohibits motions on a delegation.
Okay, cool. So next meeting, if as and when we have a motion, that would be the appropriate time to talk about the pros and cons?
Yes, and if somebody wants to, if going away from this, somebody has a motion that they'd like to make in respect of this delegation, it can be added as a notice of motion at the end of this meeting under new business, or it can be added to the package by a council member by request as per our normal process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson. Councillor Carver.
Yes, I just wanted to add that another reason for why Mahone Bay. The Council of Canadians has met in Mahone Bay for years and years and years and years. So it's like a home for that organization.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Councillor Carver, for pointing that out. Of course, we've used the Mahone Bay Center for most of our large public meetings. And so, yes, we are very comfortable to be here. And Councillor Wilson, I kind of hope there are no cons. I don't know. It seems to me that this is just a public session, information session, and people will be able to have their input. But I'll leave you guys to discuss that. That's more your business. But it's a very positive outreach we'd be doing to just spark some ideas and get people thinking about how we can have a better world after we recover from the pandemic.
When we recover.
When
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hyde. Do we have another question from Councillor Carver?
Yes, thank you. So, Chris, if we want to send in suggestions for the panel, just email them to you. And
I
we
would
have
love
your-
if we could do that. And I think I know the staff has my email and I know you do as well, Councillor Carver, but
Yeah.
the rest of the council can easily get in touch with me.
I think it's on your
through
presentation.
staff, I'm sure.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you for all your
thank
time.
you. Thank you indeed. All right. Now let's go to our Planning Advisory Committee report. This, we've moved this agenda up the schedule. CAO, will you speak to this? I don't think any of our planning people are here, are they?
No,
Chair
I
of
think
the committee is
normally
here.
it'd be the chair of the committee, but I know Richard,
I was
this
gonna
is the
say-
first time delivering a report as the chair of the committee. So typically what we do is we highlight the motions in there. I can put it up on the screen if you'd like. Do you want me to put it up on the screen or have you got it on your end?
If you could put it up, CAO, that'd be great.
It would help the group, I think.
All right, so everybody should be able to see the draft minutes here, and I'm just going to scroll down to the recommendation here, and I apologize that normally we do try to highlight the recommendations to council. So I'm just going to note that big one there.
Can you hit the big button?
Highlighted for you, yeah. So normally, if you want to pass this on, you start from that town council, and that way you have it in the phrasing of a motion.
Can you expand that a little bit, please,
Sure.
CAO?
Okay, so it should all be on the screen.
As it states there, the Planning Advisory Committee met and we took in the accounts, all the advisings from the planning staff. And under that, the PAC has passed a motion that we recommend to town council that they reject the request to amend the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw to permit commercial use within the residential unzoned zone, unserviced zone. And also that we're also wanted to recommend to council that this request be submitted to Upland along with any correspondence received in respect to the proposed development for consideration as public input as part of the Plan Mahone Bay review being conducted by Upland. And I would so make that motion that we reject and the request for the amendment to the municipal planning strategy and the land use bylaw include the others.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor, seconds? Okay, you've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? The motion is carried. The request has been, to amend has been rejected. Okay, thank you. That was an interesting discussion we had the other night. Let's go to the next item, correspondence, action items. First one is, what is your wish with the action items?
Mayor, I have a few brief motions on this topic, if you'd indulge me.
Yes, please.
Pardon me, just 1 second. Lost my notes, Mayor. Just one moment.
Okay.
Mayor, regarding the correspondence pertaining to the provincial volunteer awards, I'd move that council direct staff to include information on the process to nominate community members for the 2021 volunteer awards in the next mayor's newsletter.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Now seconds. All in favor? Motion is carried. Mr. Councillor Feeney, I think I hear another motion. Do I
do.
coming or?
Do Mayor, with regard to the correspondence on from the chamber regarding local artists and the Vic and using
Yeah.
that space, I'd move the council direct staff to review the chamber's request and report back to council with recommendations.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver seconds. You've heard the question. All in favor? The motion is carried.
And Mayor, finally, with regard to Mr. Phillips' correspondence on behalf of the chamber, I'd move the council direct staff to ascertain the cost of installing several secure electrical power outlets and 2 picnic tables with the intention to include those investments in the overall 21-22 Edgewater Beautification Initiative. So the theme there is that we have a program that we chatted about that includes some beautification work along Edgewater, including new lampposts and as well as some work in front of the cemetery. And I'd propose that those 2 elements would get consolidated, potentially get consolidated into that overall project.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilson seconds. CAO?
Just wanted to comment with respect to that project, because I know it was one that we'd been looking for funding for this year. And just a little bit of perspective, I can't say too much, but we've had some interest in people to donate to some of the components of that project, and particularly one of them was the restoration of the picket fence at the cemetery. So just want to suggest that the picnic tables are another one where, presuming that they do get added into the project, might make a great opportunity for a fundraising donation kind of opportunity. So as the project goes forward and we may be doing it without external funding, we can look for those kind of things as a possible support opportunity for someone in the community.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Kangata, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Burdick.
So because I don't have the history of the project, and I guess in my mind I'm trying to think of why would we opt to do that as opposed to considering that and putting it in the budget if it's something we want to do. So if somebody can help me with that rationale, it'd be great.
Yeah, the short strokes is that we had an integrated project last year and we try to avail ourselves of the matching funding for the province for beautification initiatives. And the program that got kickstarted last year, we made the decision when we only received half the funding to prioritize the wayfinding strategy for last year. So the second element that didn't get funded in last year's budget because of the lack of matching money was the Edgewater Beautification Initiative. And that included elements like new lampposts where the old ones had broken off in front of the 3 churches, and as well as upgrading the picket fence around the cemetery and a few other traditional beautification type initiatives. So when I saw this note from the chamber, it seemed like there are a lot of synergies with that particular property. And it just seems to me that if we consolidate it all into one package, that will, when Dylan moves forward with this year's funding requests, who knows if we'll be successful or not. We may not be at all, but then the cost would fall 100% on the town. But as far as a project, it just seems like a logical grouping of initiatives.
Okay.
And in terms of the interaction with budget, my understanding, if this motion were to pass, is that that's just constructing the project that is in the budget for council to then discuss at budget time.
Yeah, that exactly, Dylan. All I'm suggesting is this would now be an element that would be potentially added to that project based on costing and how much, and the due diligence that staff would undertake.
Okay, Councillor Burdick?
Thanks. Is it true that the bike repair and the bike rack and repair station was a modal project with the town, or was that exclusively a town project? The one that's on Long Hill. I
On
think
the
that's
trail?
It
yeah.
was the Trail Association project.
Trail
No, it wasn't-
Association.
Yeah, it wasn't
Okay.
a town project. We've talked about it. It's come up a couple times in the discussions around the bicycle route, that things like that might have other locations in town where they would be appropriate. But I would suggest that because we have an item on the agenda about consultations with regards to bicycle route, that would be a good way to hear feedback about appropriate locations and that type of detail before anything else would happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
In the letter, Jeff talks about winterization of the washrooms or a potential setting up a washroom in other locations, and sort of wondering, so where do we leave that, or are we lumping everything in there?
Councillor Finn?
Mayor, if the last motion is successfully approved and we move on, I do have one further motion I think that speaks to the deputy mayor's point.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Finney. The last piece I was just wondering is, as we include, so one of the things I'm grateful for the chamber trying to get council to do things that will, in many ways, kickstart people, not kickstart, but promote Mahone Bay being a destination. In many ways, get people coming out and I guess will impact the business in some ways. And thinking of the same way that provincial and federal governments incentivize municipalities to sort of say, we'll put in this money if you put your money in it. I'm sort of wondering whether we can do the same with these projects where we're asking the chamber to step up and put in some money, and we're putting in, we are planning to put in some to a certain extent and have that commitment of a shared partnership, whether that's something that council would be willing to consider.
CAO?
Yeah, I know we're still in discussion on Joe's motion, so I'm going to make it relate to that because we have the wayfinding as an example. So the part of the project that did go forward this year did go forward as a jointly funded initiative with 5,000 from the chamber and I believe 10,000 from the town was the contribution there. So similar structure might be used with the project in the future.
Okay, thank you. Clerk, would you do us the favor of reading that motion?
Sure. That council, let me make sure where I am. The council directs staff to ascertain the cost of installing secure electrical power outlets and 2 picnic tables with the intention to include those investments in the overall 2021-22 Edgewater Street Beautification Initiative.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried.
And Mayor, finally, and thank you, with regard to Mr. Phillips' funding request, I'd move that the chamber's request for improved community washroom facilities, as noted in his correspondence, be referred to the 2021-2022 budget process.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Now. You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? The motion's carried. Before we leave the action items correspondence, I would note the letter from Jenny Sanderson of the Mahone Bay Garden Club. And they are I'm sorry, Councillor Carver.
Yes, I'd like to speak to that letter.
Okay.
And to make a motion. One of the things that they commented on, apart from all the wonderful good works that they have done to make our town beautiful, was they expressed the concern about deer eating some of the plants that they have been tending. And I would like to make a motion that council direct staff to research the possible application of bylaw that would prohibit feeding wildlife in the town.
Good one.
That's my motion.
Do we have a seconder on that motion? Seconded by Councillor Feeney. Moved and seconded for staff to investigate the feasibility of a bylaw to restrict persons feeding wild animals,
Wildlife.
deer in
Yeah.
particular. Mr. Hyde, you had a comment on the question?
Yeah, quickly, I'm sure it's something we can do. I know we had a similar bylaw down in Shelburne, but I just wanted to use this as an illustration of, presuming this one does pass, council now has a new policy and strategy committee. And one of the things we'll do with that committee is we'll look at the list of requested policies and bylaws. And that way council can decide, where this one fits in on the list where staff time is concerned. So I don't think you should not be able to do things like this, but I also want to note that council will get the opportunity to rank it in when do we get to it relative to some of the other policies and bylaws on the list. So just wanted to give that note.
Fair enough.
You've heard the motion. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. I did have a citizen that asked me if she could shoot deer from her doorstep with a crossbow because they were eating her plants. Deputy Mayor.
I know the motion's carried. I was trying to not to vote for it, but I was trying to ask a question whether the motion should be to refer that to the strategy, like the policy and strategy committee, as opposed to having staff research it. Because if staff are researching, they're already starting the work. Yet we're saying we're supposed to discuss it there so that it can be prioritized or ranked. Am I wrong in assuming that?
I think it's a good point. I think that's probably going to be from now on a convention we'll need to get used to because we haven't had that mechanism before. It should go there first. Council can prioritize and then see what staff's going to do with it next. So I'm going to interpret this motion as that we will talk about it before staff do any of that research. And we have, I know Mo is still going to schedule an opportunity coming up for the first meeting of that committee. So that sounds great. If everybody doesn't mind, I won't be researching it in the meantime.
That satisfies me as the person who made the motion, so that's fine.
The
Thank
deer
you.
have been munching here for a long time. A few more weeks won't make any difference. I was going to ask council, I was going to ask them to consider a motion to direct staff to prepare a letter for my signature to go to the garden club to thank them for all the work they have done again. You see them in the summertime, they're out there busy as bees in the gardens, making the town look more beautiful. I think we owe them a vote of thanks. And I think it would be a note from me on behalf of council to thank them for all the work that they've done. If somebody wanted to make that motion. So moved by Councillor Carver, seconded by Councillor Now. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Good one. Okay.
Mayor, with regard, sorry, Mayor,
Yeah.
I'm beating you to the punch.
You want another motion?
With regard to the correspondence, I'd recommend we receive and file the correspondence information items.
Okay. All right. The only thing I would point out is that the NSFM Monday memo on the 18th of January, I believe, talks about the spring workshop, and they're canvassing for ideas that we would like to see them address. And they are due by February the 2nd, which is next week. Councillor Carver.
There's a motion on the floor, but I wanted to receive and file, which hasn't yet been seconded. But I want to make a motion on one of the items in that batch of letters. If I may, shall I wait till the motion's been
Councillor
seconded?
Feeney and Councillor Now.
I'm happy to amend the motion to address Councillor Carver's request.
Okay.
Yeah, where it didn't
Councillor
get
Carver?
seconded, maybe procedurally, Joe, you could just withdraw it till
I
Debbie
just
makes hers and then.
I'm happy just
Yeah.
to withdraw the motion.
Yeah.
Okay,
Councillor, now you agree?
That's fine with me.
so
Thank
this
you.
is item
Councillor Carver.
5.7. In that correspondence information items, it's from Jeff Bowlby of Statistics Canada. And he's talking about the 2021 census of the population, and that it's going to be done. And he outlines all the benefits to municipalities, which we well understand. And he's asking us for a resolution
Mhm.
that would, for us to really encourage our residents to take part in the census. So I would like to make the motion, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Mahone Bay support the 2021 census and encourage all our residents to complete their census questionnaire online and with accurate and complete census data support programs and services that benefit our community.
I'm sorry,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Carver, can you repeat that or forward the text to
it's-
me, please?
It's in the
Okay.
letter. It's in
Okay.
Jeff Bowlby's letter. You want me to repeat it?
No, that's okay. I'll find it in the letter.
Yeah, it's in the letter.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Burdick. On the question, Deputy Mayor?
I'm always in a learning process. What is the value of a resolution like this one? I know the census is important to me, but I'm just wondering whether it's just we're doing something procedural or there's an impact on it or for it.
CAO?
I just might as well say what I would understand, because we'll find out if that's what the mover intended. I would say if it's a resolution to support, that means that when we have communications about the census, we can share them without question as to whether we're voicing a third party's material. So we just know from council we're supportive, so then that's treated as something that we can promote. So I'm not looking at it as any expenditure of resources, but we have channels that we use through social media and Code Red, non-emergency channels. So we would be authorized, I would take from this, to use those channels to support it.
And there will be 3 mayor's newsletters between now and the census date. Councillor Carver?
Yes, and as well as supporting it, I understand that the main feature for me is conveying the information that is information that's important for the municipality and encouraging residents to complete their census forms online. Just making the point, because I think it really is important.
Yeah.
People not
Okay.
being,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who
One of the
seconded the motion? I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, one of the reasons I was asking that is that in the resolution, it doesn't specify those things. So it doesn't say council will share the information, council will do X, Y, Z. So that I was wondering whether those things need to be there for that to happen, or it's just presumed that that will happen.
Good question. Good question. Well, staff will, I'm sure, keep us on track. Did you have a seconder, Councillor Carver? Councillor Burdick, I think, did. Yes. Okay. Motion is moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay. Let's go on to staff reports.
Excuse me, Your
was-
Worship. I believe that Councillor Feeney had a motion he was going to put forward again.
Oh, we withdrew it for you
Put
and
back on the floor.
Councillor Now.
Pardon me. Well, once again, the other items I'd recommend that we receive and file.
Thank you. Councillor Now,
I'll second it.
second.
With just a notation, most of those letters, and including the 4.5 from above, are regarding the glamping. And where we
Mhm.
already passed it under PAC, that those items get forwarded to Uplands as part of their, into
Good
the
catch.
new,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
that they get forwarded.
As amended, I guess to reflect that request from
Yeah.
that recommendation from the PAC
Yeah,
and
that was part of the,
the council recommendation.
okay. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Now we shall go, I think, to staff reports. Mr. CAO.
All right, we got a lot on the list. As usual, the first one is the report to council, staff report for January 28th. And this is a pretty comprehensively updated one because it is the second meeting of the month. As always, I'll take questions. I'm not going to present the whole thing. We had some questions by email. You can either choose to repeat them, or if you have them answered to your satisfaction, then that's great too. But I'll leave that to everyone to ask. And I'll put it up on the screen if necessary.
Did you, Deputy Mayor?
My apologies, I did not have a chance to look at the emails before the meeting. So if I'm asking the questions afresh, forgive me for that. The first one for me was the very first item around the 3 diamonds design and the corporate logo. It keeps coming up, and I keep in my mind thinking I should ask this. Will we at some point get to discuss that, or is the assumption that the decisions have been done and the 3 diamonds will be what we'll be using going forward? I'm a little bit confused about that.
I'm glad you asked, Deputy Mayor. So the intention has been to put a report on council's agenda that essentially sets the stage for council to discuss. But the precondition was, one of the preconditions was that we've approved the community vision under the Upland Plan Mahone Bay process, so that staff report will pull the community vision from that process as part of the context for branding conversation for that conversation. So I believe that council has that on the agenda tonight. So I think when that's presumably approved tonight, that statement from Upland, then that would be one of the preconditions that then my expectation is on your next meeting, we have a report under this item, and that's an opportunity for council to talk about it. So next meeting, short answer.
Thank you.
Councillor Burdick.
Were you finished, Deputy Mayor? Sorry.
No, the last bit was there's number 19 talks about HSF, and I wasn't so sure what that was. There was a councillor declined the request. Probably I might have been there, but I can't remember us declining a request from any HSF. So I was wondering whether there can be some clarity on that.
Oh, that's the Hospital Foundation. That was the request to donate the original artwork for the mural.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's a little hard to parse there.
So in future, if we're using acronyms, it would be great to to lay them. I was thinking.
I don't want to speak for Mo, but I'm assuming that got shortened to fit it into that cell, and I probably should have lengthened that there. So sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Burdick.
I just wanted to note that item 7 under the staff reports of the council assignments to staff is about the multi-year bench project, and it sort of twigged me with the request from the Garden Club. Is there a way to connect these things with the consultation with the age-friendly community and the Garden Club, or were they already part of the consultation on that? Because it seems like it would be a duplication of effort somewhat.
Yeah, I think it's going to be up to the town, the council, to kind of tie these together. Like we can see the similar trends coming from different organizations within the town. There is a report coming before budget about the bench program. One of the considerations for both of these is the new Accessibility Act's built environment standards. So we got to rethink, and in a very positive way, looking forward to it, the way that we do our benches and picnic tables to ensure that we are taking the opportunity to make any new benches and picnic tables accessible. And one of the considerations, you think it's the design of the bench or the picnic table, which is a factor, but the bigger factor is the siting location to have barrier-free access to it. So, the bench program now, and in light of that, every one of these locations is going to have to be accessible right up to sitting down on the bench. And that just leads to a few additional considerations. But the province is gradually clarifying those expectations. We've got some interesting clarifications recently for council members who were a part of the presentation on the accessibility framework within the county. So I do think there's a connection, and I think the connection will be one the town will make in making a commitment to have seating at regular intervals with respect to our outdoor spaces in an accessible fashion.
Could I just comment on
Councillor
that
Carter.
from the age-friendly committee point of view? Because my sense is that the age-friendly community committee had finished its work, at least, for now on that, and that the town was going to now sort of do the unfolding of the sponsoring of benches and so on. We've made recommendations about sites and so on. So it'll be coordinated, as Dylan said, through staff.
I think we've actually put the age-friendly community committee on the back burner for 6 months, Councillor Carver, I think. Yes, yeah. Thank you. Councillor Burdick.
Sorry, is it possible then just to relay that to the garden club? Just because they had a specific, it was a specific part of their letter where they were referring to the benches, although they didn't exactly ask for assistance in building them, they did refer to them. So it might be nice just to mention that to them, that it's sort of an ongoing project that needs more consultation. Possibly.
Is it the garden club or the chamber one?
That was
The chamber was requesting, but
that was the garden club,
okay.
I think.
I think we had a letter back to the garden club, so when we're doing that, I'll take a look.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Wilson. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. I see a memo there from Councillor Feeney, but I do want to talk about water. Is this an appropriate time? If I may, I'd like to take council back in time to 2014, at which point we got a letter from the province, the town did, demanding a change in our license because we were extracting far too much water from Oakland Lake above our permitted withdrawals. At that time, we thought that was impossible, and we went and did some research, we being all of the town staff, and we're very concerned because we had about 50% losses from the lake to the customer. When I say we, I guess I mean I brought it up at every meeting of council for months and months and months, and eventually we got enough attention to the subject that losses were reduced to around 20%, saving the town about $30,000 a year by 2016. The October data that we just got, we're now losing, after 4 years, 55% of our water. Just conservatively, that suggests that if you calculate only the variable costs that are associated with water volume and don't pay any attention to the more fixed costs, that we are losing approximately $50,000 a year compared to getting our losses down to an acceptable 20-25% level. It's clear to me that that's largely a result of lack of attention. When we paid attention from 2014 to 2016, we got the numbers down where they were supposed to be. Now they're back up where they're not supposed to be. And it seems to me that these are low-hanging fruit. $50,000 a year in a town this size is a significant piece of change and could allow us to do a lot of other things if we weren't pouring that money into the bay. So, just FYI. Thank you.
Good point.
Councillor Wilson, can I just ask, is there any record of what was done to reduce the leaks? I've never seen a short-term solution without infrastructure investment that could have that kind of result. So I'm curious, maybe the reporting on that was a little bit overly optimistic if it's come back to 55% after 3 years.
Yeah, I can tell you that some of the things that were done was they isolated sections of the town and did And I'm not sure of the technology, but they had, stethoscope type equipment to listen to the pipes at night when everybody's asleep and there's presumably not much water usage. And they found major leaks in several different locations, and they dug them up and replaced the piece of the valve or whatever it was. And it took a year and a half, but a year and a half later, we had a positive result.
No, thank you. I think that's a great example, because I think that goes to show that, we can put some effort, and I think we should, and we have in our asset management plan an intention to put some effort around leaks, but the short-term fix, putting bandages on 70-year-old lines, clearly there's just other leaks to come. So the long-term solution is federal and provincial reinvestment in the system.
Mayor,
Feeney.
well, Mayor, I think thanks to Luke for including that based on Councillor Wilson's request. And I think this is the kind of operational metric that is helpful when we start talking about the strategic plan. We had a conversation this morning. You start to think, you don't know what you don't know. So, I think Dylan's commentary about like, what is a reasonable loss? Like, what is the reasonable leakage? And based on industry benchmarking across the province. And if it's, it's not going to be zero, I think we'll all agree with that. It's, I don't know what the right number is, 20%, 30%, whatever is reasonable. So, I mean, those are the kinds of metrics that, the deputy mayor spoke about, something that's measurable, something that's obtainable, something that you can, you can start with a starting point and get to an ending point over 10 years. So, I know this is a long report, but I do think that the information that's now being included does have value. And this is a good example of this kind of information is really going to help us through the planning process and the budget process over the next couple of years.
Thank you. CAO.
Oh, just one more note for the budget process, because I think for some of the new councillors, they might not be aware. 2 years ago, we actually got funding under Provincial Capital Assistance Program for 2 projects. One was our effluent treatment project at the time to determine what manner of dechlorination method we would use and then to pilot it. And the other was a system diagnostic looking for leaks in the water system. And unfortunately, once we did the initial fact finding around options for the dechlorination of wastewater effluent, the pricing on that component equated to the full PCAP contribution. So recently we had an approval to reallocate the funds over to finishing that wastewater project. And that's a legislatively required project, so it just had to take precedence. The good news is that project's underway. We've gotten environment approval. There's no more chlorine in our effluent. We're meeting all the federal requirements, so that's really great. But we will have to consider in this year's budget, are we going to be able to go ahead with some of those diagnostics on the water system, which would help us to do, as Councillor Wilson's looking for targeting better around those leaks, whether it's short or long-term fixes. And, will we look at PCAP again in the hopes that they might give us more money? Although I will say, you go back every year, they may or may not continue to support it. But I think that's an important thing to discuss during our budget, because council did make the effort to include it in a budget, and then we just we got bowled over by another priority.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
So I don't know if we have this information, but on the basis of the losses that are being incurred and have been incurred in the past, is it the entire system, or it's particular sections of the system that are, I guess, the major culprit? Do we know that?
I mean, there's 2 ways to answer that. One is, as Councillor Wilson mentioned, there are some methods. That the listening is one. Takes a certain kind of skill. I know a couple of the guys who have a real ear for it. It's very interesting. There are smoke tests and other kinds of testings that you can do. There's balls that go through and actually detect microfractures in your lines. But I think that the short answer is that the lines in question mostly date to more than 70 years ago. They're original lines from our water system in 1949. So, lines from 1949 aren't supposed to be in good condition anymore. So we do know that those lines need to be replaced. If you look at the break histories, if you look at leak detection where we can find them, it does help us to target it. But at the end of the day, all of those lines that date back to the original 1949 system are overdue for replacement. And I guess the good news is the council's already prioritized those replacement projects, and our water rates, as high as they are, do already factor in the town's contribution to those projects in the event that the federal and provincial governments come along for their typical share.
Okay. I think the numbers that we saw today, there was 1.3 million liters missing on the inward line from the lake to the treatment station. And there was almost twice that missing from the treated water that comes out of the system and goes into the homes. So it's two very distinctly different pieces of pipe that are contributing to the problem. Councillor Wilson.
Yes, and for those who don't know too much about water treatment, the first part is largely explainable because there's a lot of backwashing and such like that goes on at the treatment center, where water that's coming from the lake is used to clean up the filters and has to be flushed away, can't be used. So there's a very significant amount of loss that you would expect there. The other thing I might mention while I got the floor is it's not just the dollar loss on the operating side, but I noticed an item somewhere in the budget for quite a lot of money for high efficiency pumps. And if we were pumping half as much water as we are, we probably wouldn't need the high efficiency pumps. So the savings by getting these kinds of things right are, a lot of them are not obvious, but they're very significant.
Okay. Any other questions for the CAO? No. Councillor Burdick.
Hi, it's not necessarily a question as such, but there was a very recent wastewater valve, I think, that broke in Bridgewater. It was quite a major sewage event, we'll say, and they've had to make, I think, some pretty dramatic decisions in terms of addressing that. It just feels like in our system, it's been such an ongoing issue with trying to get the funding in there that it just feels like there's this imminent possible disaster at all times that will force the issue somewhat. And that's not a question exactly, except that there is an importance to all of these things being addressed as soon as possible. And I can tell it's a really frustrating ongoing issue.
Never
I think
ends.
it's really important to note that that's where the asset management conversation has really been rising in the municipal discourse in Canada, because we've been, all of the municipalities across the country, we've been relying on infrastructure that was largely post-war. Like that was the big era of investment in public infrastructure across this country. So we're all now in this position where we need to reinvest, but the cost of that replacement is way out of whack with residents' expectations for taxes. And honestly, if property tax is going to be the way to pay for it, I think that we're all going to be hitting this wall. So right now, that means we go to the federal and provincial governments. Other than that, it's a whole new discussion around the tax powers municipalities have, and entities like HRM have been trying to provoke that conversation, because one way or another, there's hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure reinvestment that's needed around this province and vastly more around the country. We're not alone. We're in good company.
Okay, thank you. Nothing else? Okay. Thank you, CAO. As always, a comprehensive report with lots of things going on. Let's go to item 6.2, the staff report on the MELG recommendations. And I think there is a motion in that piece as well.
There's a recommendation here. I guess just in presenting this recommendation, I'm going to note council may have been thinking that there could be more in-depth coverage of some of these items, and I'll grant that there potentially could be. I think that there's a time sensitivity around deciding if we would be willing to support this call that was put forward to the province a little while ago, and having had some opportunity to talk to staff and develop a little bit of a perspective on these, I really wanted to offer council a follow-up to this request that had been put to staff a little while ago. So there is a recommendation here that suggests that we go ahead and support the recommendations from the Municipal Energy Learning Group on the basis that analysis is presented there. But I understand it's all very high level, and councillors may still have some questions. So happy to take any questions, or if someone would like to make a motion that council express support, in which case we would write a letter back expressing support.
I'll make a motion.
Councillor Carver.
I'll move that council express support for the MELG recommendations to the province as requested.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor? Seconds it? You've heard the motion?
I just
Mayor,
want to say that the level of detail was fine for me.
Mayor, I just have a couple questions. So it's
Yes, please.
it's not crystal clear who the organization is. Who is this organization? Whose recommendations are we supporting?
Yeah, I think the fact that the policy brief is titled Quest makes it a little bit more complicated. So Quest is engaged to provide administrative support to the Municipal Energy Learning Group, which is a working group of municipal staff from units throughout the province. So this list of recommendations was developed by municipal staff, mostly technical staff from around the province, with facilitation provided by the Quest staff. So that's where Quest comes into it. But the recommendations were developed by the learning group, and the learning group is composed of municipal staff.
Okay. So so this is an organization made up of municipal employees that collaborate together on behalf of the energy agenda. And do they provide guidance or advice or counsel to the municipalities with regard to policies?
It's a long-standing organization, so I've only come into it kind of recently myself. I know Aaron Long was around when it was started, and he kind of gave me a little background, and he has been less available to it over the years. But I think it's meant to be a resource for the municipalities to share stories and experiences, opportunities. But in doing that, my understanding is that a lot of the time the municipalities come together and they say, this is an area where we're running into a blockage. It's difficult. Our policies would really be helped by a certain kind of action on behalf of the province. So I think that's where the meeting facilitators got to. Let's actually write down this list that these things that come up, and let's share that with the province. It's certainly not the function of, and I think we talked about this when this first came up, not the function of Municipal Energy Learning Group to make recommendations to the province typically. And I do think this is a bit of an unusual process. I was a bit surprised to get the request myself, although I do try to attend some of their meetings. But at the same time, I think technical staff do make recommendations to the province. Waste management's a good example of that. It's quite common through the regional chairs for technical recommendations to be addressed from the technical level up through the regional chairs to the province. So, I think that there is a precedent for that kind of thinking. But yeah, I agree that it's a fairly unusual process for a facilitated staff conversation to yield a recommendation to the political level.
I mean, my reading of the report is that, there's obviously strong subject matter expertise, and there are many recommendations, which I think, I could get my head around wholeheartedly, but there are a number of those recommendations that I can't imagine why as a municipality we would be in favor of. And so it's through the lens of a municipal councillor, I wonder, well, is this a recommendation for us to take on that, mandate, for example, around tax policy regarding, energy or, tax credits and things that I think that we would have a real problem with. So not saying that I couldn't be convinced, but I would rather be convinced with a very detailed policy note where, if there's a recommendation to support a policy, that you would expect that there'd be a detailed report or a paper to read that would be collateral material for it. So for me, I'm just not I just can't get my head around a blanket support for an organization that we have no formal relationship with, that talks about a bunch of details that I don't think as a municipal council that we would support if push came to shove. So I applaud their work, but I would advise strongly about a blanket rubber stamp approval.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
So I get Councillor Finney's concerns, and rightly so, but my support for this goes on the basis that this report came to us. We asked staff to do an analysis for us. They've given us a recommendation that I think, for me, I would be comfortable in saying that it has been scrutinized, and the things that probably might have concerns with, for me, I guess, minimal. So I can't agree with everything in it, but some of the recommendations that are in there would probably benefit us as a town. So from that perspective, I'm letting it. I guess taking not a leap of faith, but we have a competent staff that have looked at it and feel that these recommendations would benefit the town, and they've told us that. And on that basis, I'm comfortable enough to say we can support it. I understand the hesitance, but then when you think about this, it's a learning group of technical staff in municipalities. So similar to the technical staff that we have belief that our staff are competent. They've given us some recommendations. If maybe it might be very helpful for me in processing this, if Councillor Finney was able to give us specific things that you have concerns with, then we can maybe have that conversation, and maybe you'll move us to, or you'll move me to the place where you might be.
Sure. I mean, it would be helpful to know who the organization is. It'd be helpful to know who the subject matter experts are. It would be helpful to know what policies were studied and their collateral material. I mean, if it's an academic exercise, fair enough. I mean, but this is just a distilled report from what it looks like is a lobby group who I think most of us are unfamiliar with. They're purported to be doing. We never asked this group to do anything on behalf of the town. And like I said, there's many of those policies that I think at face value I support wholeheartedly. But there are a number of. But it seems that this is not a technical group as far as technical feasibility of their mandate. They're also talking about municipal tax policy, which I think is well outside of this unknown group's purview. So I personally just feel that I'm just not in the blank check stamping business here. I don't really feel a need as a council, as a councilor, and my recommendation to my colleagues would be to say, there's no harm, no foul. Like I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the benefit of supporting a policy which we don't understand if it's good for the town. So there's a number of them. If you review the document, there's a number of instances where the financing options, which I subscribe to wholeheartedly, does meander into municipal tax policy, which is, I think, completely, like, that mandate is well outside of this group's purview. At least that would be my opinion.
Thank you. Anyone else? Deputy Mayor?
Just a follow-up. I still haven't had which particular. There are 15. I think. How many recommendations? 11. No, 14. 14 that are there. Which particular ones you have a concern with? Because that would be very helpful. I guess if we're having the debate around, well, let's support it or not support it. Which ones do you have a concern with? Then we can discuss those and see how substantial they are. Otherwise, the exercise if I remember right, this came up with a larger report last time, and we were like, it's very detailed. We need staff to go and look at it and give us some recommendations. So we've asked them to look at it, and then we're sort of saying, well, your recommendation, by saying we will support it, we say the recommendation.
Just so we're all, this recommendation is not a recommendation from our Town of Mahone Bay staff, right? This is a recommendation from this committee, if I'm not mistaken.
I think the mayor's not looking, so I'm just going to take the liberty to respond. So I'm just going to say, because there's a lot of discussion. I think take it or leave it is a fine response to this. We received a cold call kind of invitation saying, here's some work that was done. I don't think it's harmful to support it, which is what I think I've been asked to say. Is this applicable to the town? Would this be harmful to the town? But I mean, to Councillor Feeney's point, like I haven't, and I don't recommend that I do the diligence that he's describing. So if council feels that that would just be something that's better, just let it go into the province without an endorsement from the town, no harm, no foul. I don't think it's a concerning thing to express support for. So that's where I say, I've been asked to look at whether it's applicable. I would say some of the recommendations are, and the others are not harmful. Honestly, many better thought out recommendations have been given to the province and they've never been acted on. So I think this is more about expressing support for the effort. But at the end of the day, that's, council's prerogative.
Councillor Carter.
Yes, I'm just looking at the Quest comments at the end of the staff report. And they did start by asking municipalities for recommendations. So I don't have any sense of alarm signals going off for me. There's, I think, any input to the provincial government about things that might help municipalities is to the good. So I recognize that the staff recommendation is cautious, not 100% enthusiastic, raw recommendation, but I'm perfectly comfortable supporting it.
Okay. I think most of the recommendations, or a lot of the recommendations of staff that focus on the pieces that came out of the MELG project suggest that, well, they don't really apply to the town of Mahone Bay, or they could apply to the town of Mahone Bay, maybe, right? But I think, as Councillor Carter is suggesting, on the broader context for municipalities in the province, there could be some benefit. And I think what we are supporting here is the work that's been done by the MELG group, not necessarily that we're going to jump on the bandwagon with an open checkbook and start buying this stuff. But we do have a motion on the floor. Been moved and seconded. Clerk, do you want to repeat the motion, please?
Certainly. That council express support for the MELG recommendations to the province as requested.
Thank you. On the question, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm 5. The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go on to our greenhouse gas action plan. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carver.
You missed one. Housing call 6.3.
Oh, housing call. Yes, okay. Let's talk about the housing call. CAO?
Well, yeah, so I guess I'm reporting back to say that we didn't have any official responses to our call for housing proposals. Obviously, council knows the context. It was inspired by the Rapid Housing Initiative. It was essentially saying, well, hey, why don't we, instead of just saying we don't have any ideas, why don't we put out and say, does anyone have any ideas? Well, we did get some interest in the community. People were interested in the fact that the council was soliciting ideas, but we didn't get any responses from the groups that we were looking for. So have a recommendation. This is just essentially trying to think about a possibility of next steps. If we're not getting a response to a call, we could invite entities that might be interested in talking to us. And, we have one, the definitive entity that works in this area that would be, which is the Housing Authority and Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So I had recommended the council invite them to come and speak with the council about housing. You know, maybe other ideas that come out of the call and the lack of response, and appropriate for council to make any motion in that regard now. And I can answer questions if you'd like.
Okay. Councillor Burdick.
Yes, it was a really hopeful call, and kind of the timing was a little bit difficult there because there wasn't a whole lot of time for that response to happen, really. And as it happened, it all got swept up by other projects that had been sitting, I think, and waiting for that money to come in. So I do think it's just sort of the beginning point in terms of continuing these calls and reaching out. There are multiple programs that might possibly be applicable through sort of multiple sources, and I'm kind of investigating that right now. But I think this would be a really great way to have an overview from DMAH also with suggestions. I like it.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
I know we're still building up what our agenda would be for the policy and strategy kind of conversation, and I was wondering whether we want to put affordable housing as one of those conversations. For me, I think it's a priority, and that could be a very good place to sort of have conversations that are not very, because this is a wide conversation that probably needs a lot of thinking from various angles, and there's some historical things that I think I don't understand, even with the ideas that I might have in mind. So it would benefit with having a conversation that's probably broader. So I was wondering whether we want to put affordable housing on that agenda. And
When is this committee, when is this committee supposed to meet, Mr. Hyde? Do we have a potential date?
I might turn to the clerk. I know we had a little discussion about that, and I think if she hasn't sent something out yet, I think she's going to. Maureen, can you comment about that?
So the terms of reference, actually maybe the staff report indicated the third Tuesday of the month. So as the CAO suggested, I will be sending out something to suggest the first meeting would be held on February 16th in the evening.
Thank you.
And then every third Tuesday from there, as there are agenda items.
With the
Okay.
exception of August, right?
Well, that remains to be seen at this point. Okay. Anything else on the Councillor Carver?
Yes, I was waiting for Councillor Burdick to make the motion about inviting the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing, but would you like me to leave the stage so you can make the motion, Councillor Burdick?
Sure. Yeah, I'm still getting the hang of this clearly because I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. That's not quite how things work. So I would like to make a, thank you, Councillor Carver. I would like to make a motion that council invite Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing Nova Scotia staff as a delegation to a meeting of council regarding housing in Mahone Bay and the town's approach to housing.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Carver. It's been moved and seconded on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Now let's go to the Community Greenhouse Gas Action Plan.
I think Deputy Mayor can stand up.
Yeah,
I thought he was voting for the motion.
No, I'm curious. Do I need to make a motion to have the affordable housing piece put on the agenda? Do I need to make that motion?
I think it would be, I know this is another one of these things where we're new to how do we put things on the agenda for the policy and strategy
Yeah.
committee, but I do think that it would be appropriate to make a motion to that effect. And most likely what we'll end up doing, as we already talked about, is the meeting this month will be to talk about how do we approach the agenda for these future ones. So unless you're inclined to have the discussion on the 16th, I think make the motion to add it to the agenda of the committee. And then at that meeting, we can decide, what meeting agenda it's actually going to be on.
Yeah, I'd like to move a motion that we put affordable housing on the agenda of the Policy and Strategy Committee.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Feeney. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. It's on the agenda. I'll get to this greenhouse gas thing yet, Catherine. Don't you worry. Everybody finished? Okay. Catherine, please, Catherine Dory, the greenhouse gas action plan.
So we have Catherine here, which is great. And thank you, Catherine, very much for joining us. I did want to apologize first off for council members. You saw some confusion from me by email when Councillor Carver pointed out that there was no cover report on Catherine's excellent draft plan. So you've just got this big draft plan in your package and no context for it. So for some of you, you'll remember that about a year ago, we got a big funding announcement in Chester, at the rink in Chester. Mayor Davini and I went over there with our MLA and took some photos. And that was an announcement that we had funding to hire Catherine to get to work on this project, which looks like it's just the development of a plan, but actually it's been a huge data gathering, public engagement process over the whole summer. And Catherine, you're not here to present specifically, but since you haven't had an opportunity to introduce yourself, maybe you could just briefly speak to the council. I won't put you on the spot too much to explain the whole report.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's probably good for all of you to put a face to my name. I don't think I've met some of you before in the office, but since we don't run into each other as much anymore, it's nice to meet all of you virtually. And yeah, as Dylan had mentioned, we've been working on this greenhouse gas report and the data behind it since I started. So I've been with the town for just about a year now. And it's nice to see, some of the greenhouse gas baselines and inventories come in and see how the actions that we've proposed in here can really make a difference and move Mahone Bay towards being a leader in climate change mitigation. So it's an exciting project and I'm happy to be a part of it, and I'm happy to answer questions or talk to any of you about ideas that you have for climate and energy projects. Yeah, I'll hand it back over to Dylan if he has anything else to add.
Thank you, Catherine. I just wanted to say that we'll take the questions, and then the intention that was described by the cover report that got left off was that the next step here is to talk about, we've had a ton of individual resident responses, I think more than we've ever had for any consultative process to date, about 300 households in Mahone Bay. I don't think the census has ever done that well, so maybe we could help them out with that. But what we haven't talked about is how do we take the resulting plan and take that out to the public for feedback. So want to get some input from council. We're hoping to get a motion tonight to direct staff to develop one of those engagement plan templates that we're now using with respect to this, but input from council on the plan itself, the draft changes, anything, and specifically to what do we need to do to get residents to take a look at it and give their feedback. That's what we're looking for. So happy to take any questions.
Deputy Mayor.
Great report. I'll admit I haven't read all of it. It's quite a lot. I was thinking that it probably would benefit a lot from having an executive summary and maybe a 1 or 2 pager that can sort of speak to the main points, because if we're sharing it with the community, they will not be pouring through that much of data. It would be great that if there was sort of a dashboard or something that really helps sort of help somebody navigate what the gist of what it's talking about and where things are headed. I'm talking about executive summary because that's, I guess, what I'm used to in my line of work, but you might have a better way in terms of presenting that. But great report, I think.
Councillor Carver.
Yeah, thanks for that, Deputy Mayor. I really appreciate that suggestion. It was a really well done report. I mean, it was really clearly laid out, but the content is so massive. I found it very hard to grasp at one reading. It was just a lot. So I sent some notes separately to Maureen and Dylan about some typos that I noticed in the text. So you might want to pick those up later. But it was a great report.
Councillor Carver.
One of the questions was about the numbers attached to per capita greenhouse gases, and one of them said 15,000 tons per capita. So that was one of the things that I wondered about.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that because that would be a typo. Sorry about
Move that decimal place a little bit.
Yeah.
Councillor Feeney.
Catherine, thanks very much for the report. It's quite comprehensive. I think it's, really, elegantly laid out. This is really great timing because we had a chat earlier today about the strategic plan. And I think there's a real theme about, how do we structure strategic initiatives in a way that we can measure them in some kind of a meaningful way. And it's hard. It's really hard to say, are we making any progress if all of the agenda is really aspirational? So I think this is going to be really helpful in helping us get, something that's measurable. I think the Deputy Mayor was making that point today earlier on the other call about, we really need to have a few things that we can really benchmark against, like where are we relative to our peers, and what's a reasonable aspirational goal for improvement over a 3 or 4 year period, and then maybe over a longer period, so a period of time. So I think this is going to be a great way for us to, integrate all of this effort into some of the other planning, because we have a lot of projects underway, and this is one of the key, most important ones we have in the town.
It even mentions leak detection and fixing those leaks. Water system energy waste.
Councillor Burdick.
Yes, thank you, Catherine, for this. It's really comprehensive. And there's so many intersections in there with so many other projects. And I do think that the next point is really a good one to get it out there to the public in an easy to understand way. So a précis of it a little bit and like an entry point for people. And that I think you've already established what people would like to see also, but it would help further refine it. And like Councillor Feeney was suggesting, making certain pieces will be more available to be acted on at an earlier stage, and then longer term sort of ideas there. But it's really, really helpful. It feels really good. It feels like it intersects with things that are happening already, with the wind farm. The good things and the bad things essentially are all sort of laid out there, which is really wonderful. It's really important to think about all of these things. So I do think that's the next stage, is making that, the plan for the I can't remember the term that you used, Dylan, but
yeah, we talk about developing engagement plans, and that's where, and Alice, this could be an example where, as you said, it sounds like a good idea. So somebody could say, make a motion to direct staff to develop an engagement plan, and whether it's in your motion or not, I'm going to note the top thing in this engagement plan will be developing easy to digest, easy to explain materials that we've now talked about. So that'll be part of that.
Okay.
Councillor Carter.
Yes, I have a question about the recommended motion. That council direct staff to produce a public engagement plan for the adoption of the community greenhouse gas reduction action plan. I don't quite get the connection between a public engagement plan for the adoption of
So
the
the
action
reason I
plan.
phrased it that way is that, you know, what I think that council needs to direct us to do is say what engagement activities would take place between this presentation of the plan and council's eventual adoption of a final draft of the plan. And I think it's important because at the end of that process, council needs to have the confidence to say, we can adopt this plan. And that way it can do more than be an information piece, but can become, as to Councillor Feeney's point, part of our strategic direction. And it's already almost all in our budgets anyway. I mean, that's the great thing
Yeah.
about this, is it takes advantage of ongoing projects. Council's already leading. We talked about that earlier this meeting, where we're already a leader on the environment, and this plan just puts it in perspective very well.
So it's a public engagement plan. For I'm trying to put in some words in there that'll make that.
Yeah,
step.
feel free to wordsmith it if you want.
A public engagement plan in preparation for presenting the plan to council for consideration. Does that sort of capture the sequence?
As long as everybody around the table here knows that it does, the document will come back with that wording, and that hopefully everybody will be able to digest the, you know, we'll go over it when we bring the template back. So everybody will need to be comfortable that that's what it represents, but I understand.
Council, do you understand? Okay.
A motion that council direct staff to produce a public engagement plan in preparation for the presentation of the Greenhouse Reduction Action Plan to council for consideration. How does that sound?
Councillor Burdick, comment?
I was just going to second that.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. On the question, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion's carried. CAO, it might be useful to keep in mind some of the things we did around the asset management project by way of communication pieces to help the public understand specifically what it is that Catherine's plan is talking about.
I think that's a really great point, and I know that Catherine already has a good amount of materials in terms of graphics, including some graphics of her with and without masks, and so we'll use those to help work into some of the public, you know, posters and other materials that we'll present to council with that engagement plan concept. And thank you, Catherine, for being here. You can choose to follow the rest of the council meeting at your discretion, but appreciate you coming out in the evening for this.
Yeah, it was great to be here, and I appreciate all of the feedback. And I'll probably pop off now, but it was good to see everyone, and I hope you all stay safe. And I'll probably talk to you all at some point soon.
Thank you, Catherine.
Night, everyone.
Okay, let's look at the next item, the transportation project update.
So this is,
CAO?
yeah, not welcome news for anyone. I guess the one way it's welcome is it unshackles us from the idea that we're trying to jump through anyone else's hoops. So hopefully we can make a plan to action as much of this project as council is inclined to do as quickly as we're able to do it. I note the engineering design. I understand we do have a preliminary engineering estimate. I will say I'm optimistic that if we sharpen our pencils around that engineering design, that the costs will come down. Obviously, we benefit from using the engineering estimate that might be a little bit inflated when we're looking for external support. So if we do go ahead with some engineering designs ahead of budget, my hope would be that, you know, have a very good understanding before we're at construction on some of these that maybe we can get the cost down, since they'll be our costs if we're inclined to proceed in the spring. So anyway, I'll take questions. I'm maybe getting ahead of myself.
Councillor Feeney.
Dylan, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, so we had an integrated project that was about $200,000 to do the entire portfolio, under the theory that we were going to get matching dollars from our partners. That didn't happen, but we have subsequently made a decision to go our own way and fully fund the project at the corner of across from the Salt Box and Main Street. And that project's on the rails, and it's going to unfold as over the next 6 months.
As soon as we get 8 hours of no precipitation and above 4-degree weather, Town and Country's going to come flying in and paint those stop bars, and all the other stuff's just waiting to be deployed. Yeah.
Fair enough. So the rest of the project, it's your intention that we're going to package it all up and revisit it and see where it lands on the priority list in the budget period on the basis of 100% funding from the town.
Yeah, if the motion that's here goes ahead, we will incur, my thought is it's worth incurring some costs to really get the engineering stuff nailed down, particularly with regards to the crosswalk projects, the one-way street. I would suggest that where we're doing the consultation around cycling, there just isn't enough information. We always knew we were going to need additional consultation to really clarify what the traffic calming measures were going to look like. So I would suggest that Clearway Kinburn traffic calming piece be set aside to benefit from the bicycle consultation if council approves that going ahead as planned, and that for the rest of it we go ahead and get the exact numbers. Here's the number of signs, here's exactly what we're expecting in terms of concrete work, anything else, and just have all that ready so that council can absolutely say, yes, do it as soon as the weather is appropriate.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
This is just out of my naivety or just in curiosity. In the report, it sort of indicates that basically doing crosswalks would cost something like 7,000. Is that true?
Well, that's where I said, we might sharpen our pencils. I mean, the engineers say that's how much they cost, and it's good when you go into the province to use a number from an external engineer like CBCL. In practice, in Mahone Bay, it's not likely to come to that cost. I mean, you've got advanced signage, you've got at the intersection signage. If you put in new poles for both of those, that's up to 8 new poles. Every one of those has got a new sign on it. If you do curb cuts and you do new concrete work, it can add up pretty quickly. I can certainly see it adding up to thousands of dollars, but my expectation is in most cases we're using existing poles, and Mahone Bay has gotten creative sometimes with where those poles are. So there just aren't opportunities to add new dedicated poles most of the time. It's creating a hazard on our sidewalks. There's a lot of other factors to consider. So most likely the average of these, some of them probably will be the full cost, just depending on where they are. We may have some accessibility improvements we can make while we're at it, which is great knowing the act is coming. But for some of them, they'll probably come in quite a bit less than that. And so we'll have the benefit of analyzing that, as long as council doesn't mind us incurring a little bit of cost to get the engineering work done, so that we know that for an absolute fact, which is what we've done for Clearway and Main now. And the budget did come back right on. I will say that the budget that they developed for us for Clearway and Main, at the early stage, Derek and I gave some input, which cut it down. Their initial estimate for that was quite a bit higher. So as it turned out, their estimate was bang on there, but that's just because it's a lit. The stop signs need lighting explicitly, so that's a little bit more than your average crosswalk.
Yeah, just like as a follow-up, and my thoughts are going towards when a public document, because it gets to be public, when a public document is put out there that, these are the projected costs, and I'm in that industry, then I know I can mark up my fees to get there whether there's an RFP or something comes out. And I'm wondering whether having these high numbers out there in the public harms us in some ways? Do you think there'll be a
It's
possibility?
always a strategic discussion. We've sometimes we put out numbers, sometimes we don't. With the town hall reno, which I won't talk about much publicly because it's ongoing, our budget number was quite low, and that budget number helps to perhaps set people's expectations low. So there can be some positives there. In this case, though, this is a self-managed project. Public Works does have the capacity to oversee. So we will actually be purchasing each of the pieces of equipment, and so those prices are fixed. So not a lot of opportunity there for cost inflation. The concrete work is pretty much set. We know what the concrete work was last year for the same work, for example, at the bandstand. So I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for inflation on that. But it's a great question. There's always a discussion around that when we approach a project.
Okay, Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, I'd move the council direct staff to proceed with the engineering designs and update the associated cost estimates for the 2020-2021 transportation project for consideration in the 21-22 budget process.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to the next item, the 2021-25 strategic plan engagement, or the strategic plan engagement plan.
Yeah, a bit of a mouthful. So this is the first of a series of these engagement plan templates. So I just kind of wanted to preface this one a little bit extra to say that under the council's public engagement policy, which I think the council had in their last strategic plan as an objective, develop a public engagement policy. So that's one check mark in our evaluation. We did do that. And the public engagement policy is pretty unique in Nova Scotia. We did look all over the continent, and we looked at IEP2 best practice in there. And essentially, the policy prescribes certain things that every public engagement plan needs to include, and provides council with a process to verify that the public engagement plan matches up with expectations. So these are our first few, and whenever they're going to be presented like this, the implicit request is that council approve the public engagement plan as presented, or that council approve it as amended if you have amendments that you want to make on the fly, say, can we change this or that? And alternatively, that council direct staff to revise the public engagement plan, as follows. It provides some instruction, and it would come back to another meeting. And when council felt it was appropriate to approve, staff would then have to go ahead in terms of the resource allocation and also the type of activities. Some of these include stakeholder identification, other pieces that council really does need to weigh in on. So I hope council will like this going forward. Tonight, we're looking for feedback on these plans. We're also looking for feedback on the template and the process of getting council approval. And it's understandable if you want to defer this particular one pending more discussion in the strategic planning process. So that's also, council's prerogative as well to put this on an agenda that follows your strategic planning session, if that would be more appropriate.
I like the idea of having a follow-up to a strategic plan. I would like to make that motion that we defer this until we have completed or almost completed the strategic planning process.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Burdick, you're going to have a comment?
I guess I understand deferring it. I have a question about the order of the engagement tools. Is there a specific order suggested there? Because it looks like the public hearing is at the beginning, but might be a little later.
Yeah, it's a little confusing just because that it appears on the list earlier, and then it says down below that, before we do the hearing, we would do a public information meeting. Essentially, what's being proposed here in layman's terms is this is a planning document approval process. So whenever we have planning documents, they're materially impacting on people's lives. And there's a couple of steps that we always go through. One is to put it out with a general purpose meeting and say, here is the new document. Does anyone have thoughts, questions, comments about it more broadly? And then based on the report from that session, council would say, are we going to modify it in any way? And whether we are or not, it then goes forward to a hearing. So that's essentially the basic process that's being recommended here would be the same. When council feels the strategic plan draft is sufficiently ready, have a session, general public are invited. We'd like to have your commentary quite broadly. Council listens to that, determines if any changes are needed on that basis, and then puts a hearing out for final yay or nay comments from the public before approval. There's nothing in there with regards to adding additional steps to create, survey type data collection or anything like that. So that's an opportunity if council would like to see more rather than deferring. You could say we'd like to direct staff to look at, making changes or additions to this in the meantime. Or if you think, at this point, a little too soon to say, then deferring and then coming back to that conversation.
Councillor Wilson was next, and then Deputy Mayor.
Do we have a seconder for that motion by Councillor Carver?
No, we don't, not yet.
Then
I
I'll
heard it
second
as
the
I would
motion.
like to make, so nobody
We
seconded.
do
So
now.
I'll second it, please.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
In trying to understand this process and the whole strategic planning piece is that the consultants we've hired will help us come up with a draft plan, and then they will be done. Their job will be done, and then we'll put this draft plan to the public, and then it'll come back to us to do changes internally, or will there be an opportunity within that span for the consultant to come in and take in the feedback that we get through that process? How is that envisioned?
I think that's something we could work out. I mean, the original
Okay.
contract, you're right, it goes up to the consultants work with council to produce a document that goes out to the public. There isn't technically any role for the consultants after that point, but if we have a desire as this goes forward, I'm sure that that could be negotiated. So that there is some, flexibility, but may have some additional cost if there's more time.
Okay.
All right. Councillor Carver.
And we've agreed that in lieu of having an active outreach public consultation process as part of developing the strategic plan, because of time limitations, we're going to rely on the public input that's already available through the other public engagement processes we've had recently. Does that sound right? So,
And
I
then
mean, ideally, you'd be doing some public consultation or engagement at the front end, but we're sort of modifying it and doing a hybrid.
Well, and I think Councilor Carver, you don't mind, I think you've pointed out a few times the kind of engagement fatigue that we risk. We're in the middle of Plan Mahone Bay, and we just talked about 300 households responding to Catherine's survey over the past 6 months. So, certainly we have had a lot of engagement come in, and people may say, well, you're asking us yet again. We just told you our answers on these subjects last month and the month before. So yeah, that was the context. We went out and hired these folks, knowing that we had been engaging in a number of engagement opportunities or processes throughout the year.
Okay. Okay, you've heard the motion. Motion is to defer this item until our strategic planning process is a bit more mature than what it is now. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the First Nations Traditional Land Acknowledgement Engagement Plan.
Same preface here. We're looking for feedback on any changes that might need to be made to this plan before council would be in a position to approve it, or a motion to approve it, in which case we would begin to implement the plan as stated. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Questions?
Just by approving,
Councillor Carver. Yes, Councillor Carver was first, Councillor Feeney.
Oh, sorry, thank you. So I had a comment or a suggested change for the very first bullet called how input will be used. So to inform the town of Mahone Bay's traditional land acknowledgement, which sort of leaves me wondering where that's going. So I had a suggestion to change the wording to inform the wording of the land acknowledgement, and to inform the orientation of staff, council members, and messaging for the public. And that would be because we have the motion from last year that we wanted to include the background on the land acknowledgement in our orientation procedures. And I don't think that's been covered yet. And this is an opportunity to do that and to get some information or input from Indigenous community about the history, the background, the meaning, the significance, the weight of it, so that becomes part of us as through orientation and discussion. So it was just a suggested revision of the wording for that particular bullet.
Councillor Feeney?
I guess with regard to that edit, I'd be prepared to move this along. I mean, that would be my, I think we already have an approval of council from, I believe it was late 2019. And then there was another decision in 2020. Councillor Carver can remind me on the fine details because I know she's got them at the top of her head, but I think we're ready to proceed if everyone is comfortable with this engagement plan, and I know I certainly am. I think it's in good shape, and I'd move it along if that's where everybody else's head is at.
So are you making a motion, Councillor Feeney?
I would be with the edits that Councillor Carver provided.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
I was just wondering about just whether council will be willing to make a small amendment. I think there's a spot there where it talks about one or a few members of council, and I wanted to propose it to be all members of council rather than just a few. Trying to get to it.
Mm-hmm. That was to meet with, I think, with the representatives from the First Nations.
Yes. I think if we're forming, so for me, when I look at this one, it's forming good relationships with First Nations folks, and I think we all come at this from very different perspectives, and I think it probably will be a very good learning exercise for all of us. And also, we're building relationships, and they can be different. So all of us would benefit, and we would benefit the process.
CAO?
I think it's noted in there, and Maureen, feel free if I don't cover this sufficiently, but Deputy Mayor, I'm sure that under normal circumstances would be ideal. And one of the things we do with these is note that the circumstances that may be affecting our plans. And we've recently had some recognition about gathering limits. And so I think just in consideration of the desire to be able to move forward with this, with the uncertainty around limitations, if there is a requirement that all members of council be included, we're essentially limiting the other party to one person in the room with us. So I guess, with that consideration in mind, I would urge council to identify maybe one or more members who might be able to represent council in that process. Just because it is going to be a tough thing the expectation is in-person consultation may be preferred here.
And further to that, I just want to note that throughout this, the wording here is it is expected that the initial meetings would involve a few people. One of those is, when we make our original reach out and say, we'd like to speak with you, there will have to be a determination. Is it appropriate for, a few people to sit down in a room to start to talk about how could we have these conversations, as opposed to insisting that a group of 9 people come and sit down to start. So that's why there's the the wording about the initial meetings and how many representatives from the town of Mahone Bay would take part in discussion will be determined by initial discussions, scheduling, and COVID-19 protocols.
Makes
Mhm.
sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
I just earlier when we put this on the table, Councillor Feeney mentioned the desire to make sure everybody was on the same page, and I just wanted to make sure there was one point that I just want to make sure everybody's clear on. You probably all are. Just to be absolutely clear, we are currently, by motion of council last year, using this acknowledgement statement. So when we go out in this, we're going to be very clear. This is the statement that we are using, and we're looking for your input. So I just want to make sure that people are clear around our table that that's the context for this engagement based on council's prior approval of the statement.
was there any consultation with First Nations before we embraced this statement?
No, we didn't have any specific. We talked to the province and to Aboriginal Affairs to come up with the statement.
Oh, okay. Councillor Carver.
I have a question for the CAO. So I understood you to say that just now that we have approved wording on motion of council, and we're looking for input from the Indigenous community, and with the hope that what will happen as a result of their input.
Well, that's why we try to be very clear with these. So we say the purpose is to get their input. We would bring it back to council. We're not making any commitment that the wording will be determined by this process unless council wants to change the engagement plan to actually give that decision-making authority over to the engagement process. Our expectation is we're gathering feedback, which may be we think the statement is bang on, or we think it needs changes, we think it needs improvement, and then council would have to deal with that on its own merits.
So the input may or may not result in a change to the
Yeah,
wording.
exactly. That would be council's prerogative unless, and it's a good point that we could design a process like this,
Yeah.
and council could say in advance, well, we're giving the process the authority to make a determination, but we're not saying that here.
No, and the changed wording that I had suggested was that how will the input be used to inform the wording of our land acknowledgement statement. So that doesn't mean to change it. It doesn't mean to approve it. It could be, sounds great to us, and this is what it means to us. I mean, the whole context of the history and the value.
Are you in a sense validating what it says, but we're going to consider what the First Nations person's perspective is on what our statement is? So it could change.
Yeah.
Right?
Council made the motion, council can change it at any time. That's always council's prerogative. We're just not, there's no commitment implicit in this process that it would change.
Okay. Councillor Burdick.
I would like to second the motion that Councillor Feeney made. I think you had a motion there, so that we can get this engagement plan going.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion. It's been seconded. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Mayor,
Mayor, could we have
Yes,
a tiny?
ma'am.
It's 9:10, and we've been at it
It
since
is.
7:45. Could we have a tiny break?
I think 10 minutes or 5 would be enough. Your choice.
5 is fine for me.
5 would work for me.
5? Okay, I can get my ice and my scotch in 5 minutes. Okay, 5-minute break. At 9:15, we'll finish it. Okay?
Mayor, when we get back in session, I think I'm going to move that we defer 6.8 until the next meeting. Does that sound okay to you? Oh, you're on mute. David, you're on mute.
Just a warning that I muted everybody. Well,
Ah.
anybody who didn't mute, because we're still live streaming. I can't pause the live stream.
Fair enough, Kelly.
Make my life more complicated. Why in particular, Joseph? Just curious.
Well, I think it's just in the interest of, I know
Time?
I don't believe it's time sensitive, but I do think it's worthy of discussion, significant discussion, and I just think
Okay.
I think it'll have a more respectful commentary if we defer it.
All right.
And we have an in-camera meeting to follow, so.
That's right. And we don't have anyone who's going to present on the RCMP reports, are we? So that'll just be anybody have any questions kind of thing.
That's correct.
Again, shocked to see there were 2 suicides in the quarter that the first report, July to September. Always amazed at the number of those that are happening.
Today was, Bell Let's Talk Day. So I think we were up over 24 million tweets and Facebook
Yeah, there
posts.
was a lot of local folks joined in that online.
And Joe, I did just before I turned my camera on, I was able to hear the part about there's no time sensitivity, and I just wanted to confirm that deferring that item to the next meeting, there isn't any sort of hidden time sensitivity there that you're not picking up on. You're correct that that's not too time sensitive.
Not muted.
Bill back here.
Okay, I think everyone is back. Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, with regard to 6.8, we had a tremendous presentation 2 years ago from the Blue Route team and the Bicycle Nova Scotia folks. It's kind of one of the more memorable presentations of the last term for me. And we also have a transportation study. So this item has a lot of other moving parts. And I think given the time tonight, I think we'd all be better off if we defer this item to our next meeting when we can have a more in-depth conversation on this particular initiative and kind of give it its, give it its respectful hearing. So I'd move that we defer this to next meeting.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Now. You've heard the question. Defer this item to the next meeting. All in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go on to the Plan Mahone Bay amended documents. CAO, do you want to speak to those?
Yeah, I'll just note, so these are coming back with changes requested by council. Upland worked quick with Maureen's help to make some changes. We did have some email traffic just between councilors and staff clarifying some of these changes. So if there's any final changes, I guess the question would be, can they be made with a approval of the documents as amended with a specific reference to another change, or can we approve them as they are presented now? And just to explain, the approval that's being sought is approval to use these documents in the Plan Mahone Bay Phase 2 engagement process. So they're not becoming part of the resulting planning strategy and land use bylaw, although elements of them, of course, will end up being reflected in those drafts. That's the whole idea. But that will come forward for subsequent approval by council.
Thank you. Councillor Carver.
two things. First of all, I would like to say kudos to Councillor Burdick for the fabulous rewording or suggested rewording that was, it worked really, really well. And I have still a concern about the term, using the term co-housing as shared, as an example of shared housing. It's a shared housing arrangement, but it's not strictly speaking shared housing. So I spoke with the CAO earlier about the suggested idea of changing the wording so that it would say something to this effect: shared living arrangements such as co-living, home sharing, cooperative housing, and co-housing. Those are shared arrangements. But co-housing is not shared living or shared housing. So I'd made that suggestion. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Oh, Dylan's moved. You're down there at my screen.
So I was suggesting that once you understand if there are any other changes, someone can make a motion to approve as amended. But before you jump in with that motion, there may be other comments that councillors want to make. So understand you might want to.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, did you want to make a comment?
No, the question I had is if that's the only change, can we approve it with that change, and if there's no other? And I'm very grateful for all the input and the work you folks have done. Penny and Alice have given quite. The document feels like I can accept it now in many ways.
That's the motion, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I can move the motion with the amendment that Councillor Carver has mentioned.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Burdick. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay. Mahone Bay Volunteer Fire Department quarterly report. We normally would have a member of the fire department for the report. We don't have one tonight. Councillor Now, is there a comment you might like to make?
I just wanted to briefly say that just from the staff perspective, to explain the absence of the chief, we do have a recently elected chief, and he did give his regrets for not being able to be here.
Okay.
So I just thought I should pass that on. It's not an intention to change the process going forward, it just on this occasion.
Okay. Councillor Carver, did you have a comment?
Well, I have a question, and it's about the election of the new chief, which I heard about sort of totally informally, and was taken aback by hearing it so informally. I guess I would have expected a note from the fire department to town council advising us, something formal, some kind of formal. Advice that there had been a change, and so that we could then welcome the new chief and so on. So
maybe a bit out of order, but I will say that just today I did receive an official list of the officers of the fire department as per the recent AGM. So I think it was just the timing of the report meant we were on their case for a report just as soon as the new chief was in that role. So I'll circulate the members list that it only just came in.
This newly elected officers that's in their report? CAO?
Yeah, they did mention it in the report as well, but then I did receive another piece that wasn't part of our report that was just notifying the town of the.
Someone care to make a motion to congratulate the newly elected officers of the fire department? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick seconds it. This motion is to congratulate the newly elected officers. On the question, Councillor Burdick? We're all in favor. All right, good. Are you trying to say something, Councillor Burdick? You're kind of bouncing up and down.
And the thing that I'm trying to say is that I Counselor Now had mentioned that the link was not going to the fire department report, but to a police department report. And then I understood that it was updated. The link was updated, but I still got the quarterly police report instead.
Oh, did
So I
you?
don't feel like I
Okay.
can comment on.
Councilor Burdick, I would like to speak to you because you noted that you're still seeing the December date on the top of the agenda. That was updated
Yeah.
as well. So
Yeah, I
think
wondered
you
about
and I
that
should
when
have
that
a chat.
something is definitely wrong there. Yeah.
Am I talking to you from the past? I don't know where I am right now. Anyway, I don't feel so. Therefore, I don't feel like I'm going to be able to comment on that particular report, but I will in 2 months.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have any subsequent questions on it, don't hesitate to ask. We'll be sure to get some follow-up.
Well, I'm just glad that the
Councilor-
counselor now can now go on 4 or 5 new committees now that he's got all this extra spare time.
Councilor Carver, did you have another comment? No? Okay, good. Then let's go to, there's 2 RCMP quarterly reports there. And as was noted, we would normally have a member of our detachment here to speak with them, but we do not have. Does anyone have any questions about anything in that report that we can refer back to the RCMP?
Your worship, if I could just interject, just would like to note that there have been some staffing changes lately at the district level. Very quick changes. Our most recent liaison, Sergeant Dave Ferguson, is now Staff Sergeant Dave Ferguson with the Windsor Detachment. So great for him, great for them.
Yeah.
But that leaves us in a position where we didn't have anyone available right now as staff are moving into their new positions. So as you said, I'm happy to take any comments and questions back, but I did want to, as the CAO did with the fire department, we're in the same situation where in a time of a lot of change, we had some real eager beavers that still got everything in just to not interfere with our scheduling.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, let's go to the next item. Community representative appointments to committees. Clerk, are you riding herd on that?
Yeah, hopefully, Maureen, maybe you could just give us a summary of what we have done. Would that be a reasonable way to do it? Or I'll leave it to you. But we did kind of go halfway through this process. So we might want to put up on the screen or otherwise explain which appointments were made or were still to be made.
Well, the only documentation we have would be the scoring sheets. So we would ask that counselors refer to the documents you had before. As for appointments, we have only appointed the Planning Advisory Committee and the Audit and Finance Committee. So we are still looking for appointments to Heritage Advisory Committee. And I will note that council has received a recommendation from the Mahone Bay Founders Society for their representative. We are looking for appointments to the Police Advisory Board and the Asset Management Committee and the Cemetery Committee. Council will receive I think on their next agenda, recommendations or applications for the Watershed Advisory Committee.
Okay. Comments? Deputy Mayor?
Trying to refresh my memory on this, we had talked about the flaws with the scoring sheet. And we talked about possibly curing that I guess, issue before we go forward. I don't know whether I'm remembering things right or not, but that's what I thought we had said. So I'm wondering, are we saying we're going ahead with the appointments now without curing that problem, or?
CAO?
Oh, I put my hand up too soon. I don't want to answer that last question. I was just going to say that it might have been another example of how do we put things on the new policy and strategy committee agenda, because the committee's policy does prescribe that we use the scoring system. I mean, not that council use it to give weight to the decisions, but the council use it to inform the decisions. Ultimately, the decisions are made by council irrespective of the scoring. So, you have them because they've been prescribed by the policy that's in place right now. So I think in the current process, that is there unless council chooses to wait and, re-advertise. But no matter what happens with the current process, I just wanted to suggest that it's probably through amendment of the committee's policy, which could be a subject for the new committee to talk about and come up with a new way to do it for next time, or for this time if you decide to postpone.
Councillor Carver.
Well, that was a resolution of council at the last meeting that the process be reviewed. But I assume that at the moment we are bound by the current procedure, but there was a resolution.
I didn't even notice that. And Mo, can you confirm that? I'm sorry. I totally missed that on our list of staff tasks assigned.
I agree with Councillor Carver that the review was going to be done for the next time around.
Yeah.
Not for the current one.
I'm just hoping we have it noted somewhere, because usually that's the whole purpose of our structures, is that things like that never get missed. And if it was discussed but not actioned, I would want to make sure we action it. If it was actioned, it should be on the list.
It is not noted as a motion that was passed at the last meeting. My recollection is that it was discussed, but that it was not, an actual motion was not passed.
I believe I made a motion.
And we can, absolutely, we can go back and we can, that's the great thing about this, we can review the recordings and we can find if it's there, but yeah, that's up to, we can do that. I just can't do that right now where we're doing this.
I just wanted to mention it because it really stuck in my memory, having reviewed the 40 pages where we count back to you for every motion that you've ever made, that it wasn't on there. So that's what made me think of it. We'll take a look. We'll make sure that that we do find it somewhere.
So in the meantime, how can we make a decision tonight in the absence of all the data that we had the last time when we were making these decisions?
I mean, the data has been officially collected as a guide. Council can regard it or disregard it. But at the end of the day, you only have a limited number of names that have been submitted. So I guess the question is, are you in a position to move any of those names on their merits, regardless of the criteria, or not?
Well, I don't even have the names anymore. So I'm,
no.
I'm in the process of forwarding those to you again.
Sorry, I didn't
Council?
realize that people didn't have access to that. I don't think it's changed.
It's
Councillor Burdick?
Thank you. I just want to mention that this too, I think because I must have had this older version of the agenda, this was not on my agenda either. I'm sorry to say. However, I'll work with you all on it.
Okay,
And since it wasn't there, I didn't know to look for it,
Yeah, Councillor Burdick, you and I really need to talk about what's happening with your agenda.
We do, yeah.
But also, councillors, I have just resent the final scoring sheet for all applicants to your emails. You should have that now.
So Mayor, our convention of using the scoring with all of its faults that I think are well recognized, and we chatted about quite a bit at the last meeting, did result in candidates. But we also acknowledge that in certain circumstances, we also have an agenda of being inclusive and trying to bring as many people in the community onto committees as possible. So a scenario where we might have one well-qualified candidate could have applied for 3 or 4 different committees, and selectively council avails of their rights and privileges to shuffle the deck to some degree so we can override the scoring. And I believe we did that last meeting, and
Yes.
it was appropriate. It was appropriate. So if that is appropriate for any other circumstance, I just don't think that the scoring information alone will allow us to have that conversation in a respectful way. So maybe in circumstances where there is where there's one candidate for one spot, maybe we could move those forward this evening. And and if there's anything time sensitive, and the rest of the and maybe we can handle the rest of the conversation in camera later on this evening.
Yeah, are any of
Okay.
these committees time sensitive?
Well,
I mean, I guess that's all relative. Police advisory is required to meet. So at some point, the police will get their person appointed and they'll be available to us. And I think we do need to do that. But it is council's prerogative. If we're talking about waiting till your next meeting, that's not going to change anything. It
Asset
depends if you
management.
want to re-advertise and and go through a new
Oh.
process, or if you're just talking about more time for council to deliberate.
I'm thinking between now and the
Deputy
next
Mayor?
meeting, is there any committee meetings that need to take place?
In that case, you're good.
Deputy Mayor,
These appointments are for 2 years, right?
yes.
I'm comfortable if we resuscitate that motion that Penny had done. I believe it had been done. I think we're on the same page that we will review that process, but tonight we can use what Mo has sent us to assess what we need to assess and move forward.
Okay,
I'll be comfortable with that.
thank you. Councillor Wilson, did you have a comment?
Well, I'm getting a bit confused, frankly, but I'm wondering if it would be helpful to just find out, to be sure we understand how many taxpayer representatives there are on each of these committees. Because as I go through it, I see that the Police Advisory Board, for example, there were only 2 applicants. So some of these things seem to be fairly straightforward.
There's 3 actually for the Police Advisory Board. 2 people, it was their first choice. 1 person, it was their second choice. How many citizens are on the PAB? Clerk, do you have that at your,
I believe it's 2. I'm gonna
2?
double check that. Yeah, it's a little late. I'm gonna double check.
yeah,
It is too, because we went through the trouble of making sure that there's an option for either a 2 or 3 public member construction for the committee.
mm-hmm.
And we were
I
on
think
2.
that the 2 persons who it was their first choice would be an appropriate 2 people to appoint to the Police Advisory Board. Councillor Burdick? I keep forgetting you can't see me, as Hazel.
If we were to do that, Mayor, then and if we were in agreement about that, then that would open up the South Shore Regional Library Board appointment also, which is there were 2 people, 2 citizens who applied for that, and I would go
Yeah.
with N.
That's right. And one of the persons whose number 1 choice was the PAB, their
Yes.
second choice was the library board, so we could go to the first choice person on the library board. Right?
I
And
would.
that's how it works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Carver.
Well, I'm ready to make a motion to nominate somebody for the library board.
Okay.
I nominate Kara Turner for the representative to the South Shore Regional Library Board.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor. Burdick. Just a senior's moment there. Okay. This is a motion from and moved and seconded to appoint Kara Turner to the South Shore Regional Library Board. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Can we get a motion on the Police Advisory Board?
Your worship, I will nominate or move that we nominate Daryl Dawson and Angus Smith for the Police Advisory Board.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Again, Councillor Burdick. You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. What do we have here? What other committees have we not done, Clerk?
Cemetery.
Cemetery.
We haven't done cemetery.
And the Cemetery Committee, one of the people is a statutory member of the Cemetery Committee.
Guaranteed. That's right. So there's only one other person,
Correct.
right? Can I get a motion?
Mayor, I'd move that we appoint Susan Maples to the Cemetery Commission.
Thank you. Do we have a
So I think,
seconder?
I believe it's Cemetery Committee now, Dylan,
I
versus
think we
Cemetery
need to
Commission.
change it. Counselor now seconds. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving right along. Asset Management Committee.
Two.
How many do
Councillor
we need?
Carter?
How many do we need for asset management?
4.
3, I think.
That one can be up to 5, but it doesn't
Oh,
have.
wow.
There we go.
Okay.
Simple, easy peasy. I nominate, I move that the council appoint Michael Blair, Lynn Henniger,
Bill Lewis.
Dean Waterfield, and Bill Lewis to the Asset Management Committee.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
Are those the only
Oh.
ones on there for asset management? Because I know
They
Bill
are,
Lewis is
sir.
already on one. Are those
He
the only
is.
ones nominated for asset management? Because I know Bill Lewis is already on one other committee. He's on PAC. So I was just thinking
Yes,
if there's somebody else there, then maybe we should go with it. What about the
There-
Dean Waterfield down at the bottom?
there are 4 nominees, Counselor, now, and we can have up to 5.
Okay.
Okay? So, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We've already done audit and finance, and we've got the library done. I think that's it, Clerk, isn't it?
I will note that council has received a recommendation from the Mahone Bay Founders Society for their representative on the Heritage Advisory Committee. And I will note as well that in the past, we have sometimes, when we've not had as many community volunteers for committees as we had hoped for, that staff have sent out a second call for those committees.
Okay.
Such as Heritage Advisory, where we might still be looking for members of the community.
Okay, so Bill DeGrace is the nominee, I think, for the, so do we need to appoint him, or is that a given?
It is council, generally, council has to appoint any member to the committee, but as Mr. DeGrace has been on the committee before, and there is an allowance to receive a recommendation from the Founders Society for that committee.
Okay,
I'm happy to move that appointment forward.
thank you. Seconder, Counselor Now, all in favor? That motion is carried. And we're going to go to the public for specific committee positions.
I believe, sorry, I've got so many windows open over here on my side, but I believe that council is still looking for some, we don't quite have enough people for we need more people for the Heritage Advisory Committee.
1 for asset management.
Mhm.
We've got 4. We could do 5.
So honestly, in all of my time with the town, we've always ended up doing the second call. So we can quite easily get a second call started for representatives for the Heritage Advisory Committee. And if council wishes, we can also advise that there's another there's another one space available for asset management.
Okay. You'd like a motion to that effect?
You can, sure.
Okay. Entertain a motion to do a second round of canvassing for one representative for the Heritage Advisory Committee and one representative for the Asset Management Committee from our citizen cadre. So moved. Do we have a seconder?
Oh, wait, excuse me, I believe that we can ask for 2 citizen representatives on the
On
Heritage
Heritage?
Advisory.
Okay. Is
Yes,
that
I'm
true,
happy-
Kurt?
Yes,
We've always,
bas-
there's, yeah,
Counselor, no?
yes, basically what we'll
Okay.
do is we'll issue a second call for volunteers to serve on committees, and we just advertise the spaces that are still available. So in this case, it'd be 1 for asset management and 2 for the Heritage Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Mover and seconder on the motions are comfortable with that? Okay.
I'm sorry, I
All
don't
in
have the
favor?
mover and seconder. Who are the mover and seconder?
Counselor Now was the mover. Counselor Carver? No?
I moved it and I think Richard seconded, I
Oh.
think, but who knows?
Either way,
Either way.
Counselor Carver moved it and Counselor Now seconded it. Either way, all in favor? Motion's carried. Good. Thank you. I think that finishes.
Before we
that
leave
item.
that, I just wanted to point out that there was one application, well, there was application for the Age Friendly Community Committee. And because it's been put on hold for review, the applicant will have receive a letter to that effect. So,
And to that point, Councillor Carver, if they have not yet received it, it is winging its way through Canada Post now. So they will have that.
Okay, thank you. The next item, very quickly, Lunenburg County Housing Plan. At the Mayor's Deputy CAO's last meeting, the issue of housing in Lunenburg County was on the agenda. And it was a note growth of that rapid round funding that the federal government came out with, but nobody was in a position to deal with. And some of the questions that came up was, you know, what is the housing stock that we have available in each of the 5 municipalities in Lunenburg County? What kind of information have the 5 municipalities been able to gather about their housing needs? Are there some common issues that we can identify? And is there a common front that we might present to the provincial and or the federal government to address housing in a county-wide perspective, instead of trying to chase it town by town? And Councillor Burdick and I had a discussion about how she might see, as our SHAC representative, this falling out. And she is prepared to bring a group together, one representative from each of the 5 municipalities, to start the discussion, to bring the notes that they have, the initiatives they might have, the data that they've might collected, bring it together, share it, and that group could then discuss potential opportunities for a housing initiative in Lunenburg County. So there's nothing really for us to commit to at this time, other than Councillor Burdick is committing to bring this group together and start this discussion. There may be at some point in the future issues around policy or resource relative to our town as well as the other 4. And of course, it would be a decision for council to make. That's what that item is about. Appreciate your comments.
I have a question
Councillor
for,
Carver?
yes, I have a question for Councillor Burdick. So would that group be a subgroup of SHAC? Is that how that might work?
Councillor Carver, there has been discussion in Shack about this sort of intermunicipal response or inter-county sort of response to, for example, the recent proposal through the province. So I think it could work well with Shack and with because of the representatives from the different municipal units who are already there. That would be a really great entry point. So that's something that I would be presenting via Shack, I think. Yes.
Yes, that makes sense to me, that's an existing resource and to start there, yes.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to say thank you, Councillor Burdick, for taking that on. I think it needs to start somewhere. It's my overall sense of having been at Shack for quite a while now is there's I don't know where it comes from, but there's this feeling generally in many municipal units around housing is not our issue. It's supposed to be all these other levels of government. Now, but the reality is, as the closest level of government to the people, we're the ones who see the challenges, and to a certain extent, in as much as it's probably not our mandate, we can see the suffering that it's causing in community. And so if we I sort of believe that if we provide leadership in that particular area, we might see lots of gain down the road with this piece. And maybe one of the tasks that you and your fellow councillors that informed relationships might have is to turn that around so that all municipal units see this as something that they can own. That's something that, you're not saying now housing becomes the main thing that we do, but it's something that we support and we find strategic ways to support it. So I'm thankful that you're taking it on.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Burdick?
Yeah, I think it would, thank you. I think it would be, it's a really great opportunity because it has been sort of in the air for a while, I think, and it's sort of coming to that point where we're realizing, and I think there's going to be, I'm hoping that there's going to be a similar thought process in the other municipal units from those members of Shack, especially, that it is something that we all need to address. And I'm sure there'll be different needs in the different communities, but there's a commonality there for sure.
Okay, we'll talk further about it once we get our representatives identified from the other 4 municipalities. Okay, thank you. The next item was deferred, so let's go to 7.4, back to Councillor Burdick on crossing guards.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Do I simply present my motion here? Or my motion is in response to, I guess, this ongoing need that we're seeing in the community about safety at the crosswalk, and that sort of instigated the stop signs that are going to be placed there. My sense is that that will take a certain amount of time, and that perhaps there's a way in the meantime, and also perhaps beyond that time, for us to increase safety, especially for children crossing it twice a day. I know that I'm putting another thing on staff's very long list of things to do, but I thought I would present it to council and see what my fellow councillors thought of this idea.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor? Comment?
Fantastic. I would be very supportive of it.
Okay. So I'm just, my computer closed on me. I'm trying to get back to the item to get.
I think Councillor Wilson has something to say.
Councillor Wilson, he always says. Councillor Wilson, please, sir.
don't always have something to say. I'm just concerned that a motion to direct staff to research and report back on the possibility of hiring a crossing guard and then going out and hiring one is going to take longer than it's going to take to put the three-way stop in. So if we want to do this, why don't we just direct staff to go hire a crossing guard and get on with it?
CAO?
I would have said the first thing that Councillor Wilson said 100%. I do think that by the time we come back and investigate it, and if the recommendation were to do it and council decided to, it would already, this particular intersection would already have the infrastructure planned, and all that would, the crossing guard would come along to supplement that. That being said, I don't think that's necessarily a reason to shy away from looking into a crossing guard program, because this is not the only crossing in the community, and even with a stop sign, that maybe something council wants information on. I would be concerned about the idea of just jumping in with a crossing guard program. I think it's actually a pretty complex thing to get into, and the idea of doing it as a sort of a short-term stopgap, yeah, I would not recommend it. But obviously, if council directs us, we do our best there. But I think there's some reasons why council would want to look at the pros and cons and everything that's really entailed in having a crossing guard program and the liabilities before just saying that it, as a short-term fix to something which I'll grant is a concern, but it has been that way for a very long time already, and we are talking about a matter of weeks or months now at most.
Councillor Burdick?
Having lived in very densely populated areas and growing up in those areas also, I'm familiar with places where there were crosswalks and indeed lights, and there were still crossing guards. And I'm wondering what the possibility, that's sort of why I have the two levels to consider, which would be hiring. And I saw, yeah, there's a union for crossing guards. So I know it's a complex thing. However, I'm curious to see how that would apply to volunteers and how that would work if possibly the school were approached about either having a shared responsibility there and possibly looking for a pool of volunteers or a couple of volunteers to do it.
I don't want to prejudge that may be possible, but I do want to caution that from a liability perspective, it's pretty unlikely that volunteers, and I'd say 100% unlikely that the school will want to take on that responsibility. But I mean, it's something that we would be able to investigate. But you're asking a lot of someone to become liable for that activity.
Councillor Feeney and then Councillor Wilson.
So, I mean, we have an appropriation done to do the upgrade on that, in that intersection. Several tens of thousands of dollars, I think, to do the job that we all expect to happen. I think in 2021, we're not going to go back in time and get human beings to do what we really want technology to do for us as far as improving the safety of that corridor. I'm unaware of any paid hourly wage staff person that does crosswalk coverage anywhere in Lunenburg County, maybe in front of the Bridgewater School. But I mean, I'm not sure if it's, a taxpayer driven agenda to fund that function, or it's part of our core mandate there. But I'd prefer to wait until we have the project finished. And I think that's the right way to go. At the very least, I'd enter into some discussions with the school advisory council at the school to talk about, where they think they could lend a hand as far as improving the safety for the children walking across the street. I think there's a few other options to go. I'd rather spend our dollars on improving the capital infrastructure rather than use it to pay 8 hours a day of crossing guard services.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Yes, I just want to reiterate, I see this morphing from a temporary stopgap solution until we get a three-way stop into a major program of crossing guards all over town at every possible intersection and every place where we might paint a zebra stripe, I can say I am adamantly opposed to that. And I'm adamantly opposed to anything more than a short-term fix to bridge us from now till we have the technology in place.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor?
I hear the concerns. We do have crossing guards in Bridgewater, and I believe they're paid for by the town. There used to be a program called Safe Routes to School that schools could work with municipality and community members to co-fund such a thing. But it, in my time, at least with the education system, it was a challenge trying to start something like that in the town of Mahone Bay. It takes a lot of community resourcing to be able to do that kind of thing. I think for me, talking about that temporary measure, if it's something that if council would consider I would be favorable. I would consider that favorably. We're talking about a temporary measure. We've already approved to put the technology in place, whether notwithstanding, that'll get done. But this is just to, I guess, I keep saying it's not liability, but it's something that's hanging on our heads if you're not doing anything, something that's been complained a few times, and we need to do something.
Councillor Burdick. And then
Yeah.
Councillor Nair.
Thank you. I'm not suggesting in my motion that there would be a crosswalk at every, or a crossing guard at every crosswalk in town, but simply the area that would be for the school. And my motion also does mention for the period of time until the three-way stop is completed and or beyond this time. So it is meant especially to deal with this issue as it is now. And I do understand the constraints in terms of insurance, but as the deputy mayor points out, there are also liability issues if there indeed, God forbid, or whatever, an accident should happen there. And there have been many close calls, I have to say, anecdotally, but it is an ongoing issue. So I also want to mention that if this shouldn't go through, I'm willing to approach the school and just, see if there's any way, maybe there'll be it's a possible occasional program that can happen.
Okay, Councillor Now's next, and then Councillor Feeney.
Yeah, I have to agree that there are some maybe issues at that intersection. I think that we are looking at it in the right way of the long-term solution with the stop signs and that type of thing. By the time we get a cross guard in place and that type of thing, I think it's going to be redundant because we're going to be so close to having the other things in place that we won't really need it, I don't feel. So I think it's basically, I'm not sure that it's worth looking into for anything for another month, maybe two, before we can get the stop signs and stuff in place. So I think it's becoming, by that time it'll be redundant and we won't really need it.
Councillor Feeney.
So, I think there's been a recurring theme about the safety of that intersection. And there's been support from this council to move forward with a more permanent solution. I think it's time for us to have a serious conversation about moving the traffic speed down to 35 kilometers an hour along that corridor. I think that was well discussed during the election. I think there's quite a bit of community support for reducing the speeds of Main Street and School Street, and I think is that Clearway Street? Clearway Street. And I guess I don't know if we have the option of doing that unilaterally or we need to do that in conjunction with the province. I'm sure someone will tell us we're not allowed to do it, but sometimes it's better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. But if we're at a point where we think that intersection is so hazardous, we need to incur, these kinds of expenditures, I'm totally comfortable with trying to move forward right away with reducing speeds. And I don't think that'll be a surprise to anyone in the town. I think there was both there and on Pleasant Street, by the way, but incrementality, we'll take what we get in the short term.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what everyone else's thoughts, but that's another item for maybe our strategic plan meeting.
CAO?
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe it intersects as well with the deferred conversation about the community-wide bicycling route, because both Bicycle Nova Scotia and CBCL have pointed out that recommendation. Bicycle Nova Scotia in particular was recommending that on streets designated for bicycle routes, so in this case, Kinburn and Claremont, they were looking at as well, in addition to Clearway, could have a lowered speed limit, and the towns received specific requests to lower the speed limit on Claremont Street previously. So yeah, I do think there will come back up. And just to quickly recap, we do need the province's permission. The town of Lockport said they do it anyway, and they did, and they haven't been in trouble for it, but not many people are otherwise going down there and telling on them. So Lockport, 25 kilometers an hour on the whole island. Everywhere else, we need the province's permission to go down below 50, but needing their permission doesn't mean we don't get their permission. My expectation is they're going to say they want to see how it fits into a broader plan, such as the community-wide bicycling plan, as opposed to just the only measure we're taking and the only goal we have is to lower the speed limit. So that's just some context. I think we'll have to talk about it further.
Councillor Carter?
Yes, the more I listen to the discussion, the more I feel so conflicted about the need to create a safe environment at that intersection, and the complexities of the idea of trying to get a crossing guard, that the town take responsibility for a crossing guard there, because I don't think that's feasible at all, if I understand the issues around liability and as well as timing. And if there's crossing guard unions, we don't want to be union busting. I mean, it's so complicated. And for a very short term, I really can't see that that's a practical way to proceed. And I have to confess that my mind comes back to, for this period, can the parents, families be relied on to either make arrangements with friends, do the supervision for this short period? Just thinking out loud with that. I can't picture that a formal arrangement is going to get in place satisfactorily in time before the physical changes are made.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just out of curiosity, Clerk, if you consider the anticipated motion to direct staff to research and report back to council on the possibility of hiring a crossing guard for twice-a-day duty on school days, we've heard some of the issues that could impact it, the notion of liability. How long do you think it would take staff to do a fairly comprehensive review of what it means to council to do the crossing guard thing?
Well, I know he said clerk, but I'm not entirely sure why you would need to jump in. I think I can respond to that one. I just, we know the council schedule, so the best turnaround that we could expect would be the first March meeting of council that gets it in ahead of budget, but that means that actioning something is not likely to happen before April, which is what we've talked about. So
and the temperatures will be back,
and it would certainly be taking 20 hours or so of staff time, I would say, by the time all is said and done. I mean, any decent report is a 10 to 20 hour job, putting out the request for information and pulling it all together. So yeah, there's some time entailed. I think Councillor Wilson said it well, is like, if there's a real intention to look at crossing guards otherwise in general, then it's worth doing. If there's not, then it probably isn't worth doing. And council's had a chance around the table tonight to gauge if there is that interest, but one way to gauge it is to put a motion forward. So that's always an option.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick, what is your choice?
I I would say at this point, it's pretty clear that the motion would not go forward, so I'm going to withdraw it.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And
Keep our
Mr.
finger-
Mayor, we're just about to move off of council items, and I just I have had time. I guess one benefit of a long meeting, multitasking and rewatching with closed captioning, thanks to our YouTube channel, to review the discussion at our previous January 12th meeting concerning the revision of the council committee's policy around score sheets. So just to recap the way that conversation went for everyone who was asking, Penny asked, should I be making this motion now? And I said, why don't we make it at the end of the discussion at our next meeting? And she said, thank you very much, I'll do it then. And Councillor Wilson said, I'm hoping we can also talk about term limits. And now we're at that next meeting. So it would probably still be in order for a motion. And I wanted to mention it now before we go back and tell you that. Then we have to do it again at another meeting.
Okay.
So that was the motion to direct staff to, it had been to direct staff to come back with a, or this was discussed, to come back with a revision to the committee's policy, to look at a revision to the committee's policy. Now I would say, since we've talked about the new policy and strategy committee, it could be a motion to refer the scoring component of our committee's policy to policy and strategy for further consideration.
Penny, you okay with that?
Something wrong with your computer, Penny?
Yes.
There it is.
I shut myself out of the, here I am, anyway. Yes, I would like to make the motion that the citizen appointment procedure be reviewed prior to the next round of citizen appointments.
In
Does
2
that-
years' time, are you referring to?
Well, that's in 2 years' time, so we have to have it done before then.
Of course, but that's the point at which that committee is going to be considering to focus the change for.
Well, and yeah, and it could be meeting and working on it anytime between now and then.
Yep.
Councillor Carver, I know you're still making the motion. Would you be saying to have it reviewed by the policy and strategy committee? So that way,
Is that the best way to do it?
I think so, because we've talked about how that committee would then say, what are we doing when? And to the mayor's point, we know the timeline and we could then put it on
Yeah,
the list.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. That's perfect. And so that's my motion, and I would volunteer to be on the committee too.
Councillor Wilson. Second it? Okay. I would hope we would all be on that committee, but anyway.
You are.
You've heard the motion. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Carver.
Well, thank you to the CAO for tracking that down. So we,
He's got 3 or 4 computers going at the same time. The Planning Advisory Committee, we've already done that one.
Deputy Mayor's trying to have a question there, I think.
The Deputy Mayor is, okay.
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful to clarify for Councillor Carver that she's part of that committee. It's the whole of council committee, right?
Council, yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's going to be on it.
Okay.
Because it's the bylaws that all of council is going to be approving to work from. We heard from the correspondence from Greg and Christine Little and the draft minutes for the Audit and Finance Committee. There are no motions in that. If no one has any questions. No? Are there any questions from the public? Is Kelly still there or more?
Your worship, there are no questions from the public.
How many people are still watching?
At this point, there are 6 people watching.
Very good.
I think we had about twice that number earlier on.
We had 20 early on.
Oh, that's good. Excellent. How interest is, I think, is increasing. Okay, I think that concludes the business from our agenda. Entertain a motion to go in camera. Okay, moved by Councillor Burdick, seconded by Councillor Now. All in favor? Vroom. We're in camera. Kelly, if you would like to.
Just one
Sorry,
second.